Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. Everyone said if there was one word they would use to describe 22-year-old Drew Shooting, it would be busy. She was always up to something. In 2003, she was a senior at the University of North Dakota and studying graphic arts. Drew had been an honor student and homecoming queen, and was now part of the Gamma Phi Beta sorority. If her college studies weren't keeping her busy enough, she had 2 part-time jobs and volunteered with children's groups, helped kids in the kindergarten learn to read, and raised money for various charities. Drew never thought twice about offering support and giving up what little time she had to help other people. Her brother said that in school when she was 14, a new student transferred over knowing no one. Drew was the first person to talk to her and took her under her wing, and they became lifelong friends. She loved staying active, having played volleyball, basketball, and golf since she was young. And although she showed immense promise when it came to sports, everyone knew that art and being creative was her calling. She even earned the nickname Doodles when she was little because she was always drawing something, taking photographs, and crafting things. Her stepdad said, "I'd look and see a blank. She'd look and see depth, variety, and beauty." It was just natural for her. On November 22nd, 2003, was working a shift at a local Victoria's Secret store in the Columbia Mall in Grand Forks. She finished at 4 p.m. and did a little browsing of her own. An hour later, she called her boyfriend, Chris. They had been seeing each other for about 5 months, and he was also studying graphic design. Drew had picked up a new purse for her mom and couldn't wait to tell him that she not only got it at a discounted price, but was also able to use a gift card too. She stayed on the phone to Chris as she headed out into the cold to find her car. Drew had another shift in a few hours and was on a tight schedule. As she reached her car, Chris heard her say something that sounded like, okay, followed by, "Oh my God," before the phone call abruptly ended. Perhaps the signal had dipped, or he only just caught half of a complete sentence. He was holding the phone to his ear using his shoulder as he was carrying boxes, and knowing she had worked soon anyway, he carried on with his evening. At 7:40 p.m., Chris got another call from Drew, but when he answered this time, he could only hear static sounds, wind, and the numbers being pressed. After 20 seconds, the call cut off. Panic quickly mounted, and Chris called Drew's roommate Meg. Drew hadn't come back home. Meg called El Rocco, a local bar where Drew was supposed to be working her second shift, but she hadn't turned up there either. A few answered phone calls later, and Meg and Chris knew it was time to talk to the police and report her missing. Closed to 11 p.m., it was now pitch black, bitterly cold, and snow was starting to settle. Officers made their way to the car park of the mall. It was pretty empty with only a few employees parked there now, and they spotted her red car quickly. They could see the back seats had various things scattered around, changes of clothes, bags, and empty food wrappers. Although it was messy, it looked more like this was just a busy person's car, someone who was here, there, and everywhere, rather than someone rummaging through belongings. They saw the purse that she had just bought for her mother, and her wallet with money and cards inside, which they felt surely that would have been something to steal if this was a robbery. By the left back tire on the ground, they found a little black case for a knife. Things suddenly took a much darker turn. They notified Drew's dad, Alan, who raced into town. Upon seeing her empty car and the police officers milling around, he was so upset and overcome with emotion that he held a small vigil next to the vehicle, describing it as a god-awful, terrible night. Crime scene experts examined the knife sheath and determined it was part of a set that was typically sold at Menards stores, which sold everything from furniture, tools, and appliances to food and toys. It was a specific knife, though, so that gave them something to work with. No blood was found in Drew's car, and there were no signs of a struggle either. The locks didn't appear forced, and nothing was damaged or smashed. It seemed likely that she had been abducted at knife point pretty much as soon as she reached her car. They knew that Drew had made 2 calls to Chris, one of which was clearly in the mall, but the second one a few hours later was to be determined. Authorities spoke to Chris straight away, and he was ruled out as being involved. Her ex-boyfriend Adam, whom she'd been seeing for 3 years before Chris, was also eliminated from the investigation. About 25 miles away from the mall, they found one of Drew's shoes under a bridge, and soon they were able to track the location of where the second call had come from. It had come from somewhere near Crookston in Minnesota. Evidently, she had been taken across state lines, so they needed more help from outside agencies. Other law enforcement teams, and even the FBI, were soon involved in what was shaping up to be a very high-profile and media-heavy case. One investigator said that Drew was everyone's daughter. Many knew her well, and people saw themselves in this situation and just wanted to help. Grand Forks residents were so worried that when officials issued a plea for volunteers to help, 1,300 people answered the call. They were motivated by Drew. They wanted to be there for her. That just drives someone when it's coming from the heart, said the Polk County Sheriff. Another detective said, in just a matter of a couple of days it exploded. All kinds of TV trucks parked outside with their towers going up in the air. Tons of them all over the place. It was very, very chaotic and a very different world from what any of us at the GFPD were certainly used to. At one point, there were so many requests for interviews that he couldn't manage them all himself. Some of those days I'd be coming to the station at 5 in the morning to tape something for one of the morning shows. And I might be there until 10 that night taping something for a live newscast that evening, he recalled. Flyers of information and her face were being plastered everywhere. Emails were being sent to every UND student, faculty and staff member, and hundreds attended vigils for her. Her phone had been traced to within about 3 miles of a cell tower near the community of Fisher, and it was still pinging until about 8 p.m. several days later, when the phone was either turned off or ran out of battery. Busloads of volunteers were being transported from Grand Forks to Fisher. The buses were coming and going on the hour, as so many people wanted to join in. Quite literally every single stone was being overturned and checked twice. But even with the ATVs, dogs, huge search groups, and helicopters, there was nothing. The weather was a big issue. It was brutal. Freezing cold with thick snow and ice covering the ground, making an already tiring and tough search even more tricky. But no one was deterred and no one was giving up. Everybody ready? Let's find her today. Go get Drew. It had been easy to find Drew on the cameras inside the shops. She had been wearing a bright pink top and browsed for a while before buying the purse for her mother. She then put her long dark coat on as she made her way outside into the cold winter evening. This was a match to the time that she called Chris. The tapes were not great. They were not only dealing with not the best quality cameras, but the tapes would often be reused and taped over again and again. Police were also going through more than 2,000 leads, but within a matter of days they had closed them all. It was definitely good to rule people out, but this meant there were no suspects. Finally, 4 days after Drew vanished, investigators got a tip that felt different right off the bat. The caller reported that they saw a known sex offender shopping in the Columbia Mall at exactly the same time Drew was. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., they had run a check of people who had been charged with abductions and sexual assaults in the past and in the area. And they came up with 9 names, but Alfonso was the only one who had been classified as a level 3 sex offender. He had been released from prison after a 23-year sentence just 6 months prior. In 1970, where he was convicted of aggravated rape and attempted aggravated rape in conjunction with attacks on 2 young women. One of the women, Shirley, said she had offered to give him a ride home, as she knew he was a fellow student from school. He held her against her will and sexually assaulted her. He then raped the second woman at knife point. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for this attack, but the judge did not impose the full sentence for some reason, and instead Alfonso was placed in the Minnesota Security Hospital for treatment. In 1980, he was allowed to leave the hospital, and he would strike again, attempting to kidnap and stab a 3rd woman. She managed to run away and gave such a detailed description to the police that they picked him up almost instantly. This time Alfonso was sentenced to 23 years in prison and had been released in May 2003. In fact, when Shirley heard about the abduction of Drew, she immediately thought of Alfonso. It had been 30 years since she was attacked, but her mind went right back there, and she couldn't stop thinking about where he might have been that night. She said within a day of hearing about it on television and looking on the internet, I called the numbers that were listed to tell them to make sure to check what Alfonso Rodriguez had been doing that evening. This was a huge lead, and authorities, who were already going through CCTV footage from the mall now, had someone to focus on and a time to work with. Investigators were then able to locate Alfonso on the cameras in the mall as well. He had been walking around aimlessly by himself for about half an hour before Drew clocked off. In a Target store, he was just going up and down the CD aisle and around in circles. He was definitely looking for something, but the police didn't think for a second it was new music. At 3:40 p.m., he went to the exits and took a seat just by the doors. Clearly the cold breeze wasn't a bother to him. He watched as people came and went, and just 10 minutes later at 3:50 p.m., he put his gloves on and stood up quickly. He started following a blonde woman outside as she pushed her shopping towards her car. He even looked into the camera as he left. The woman he followed was not Drew, but the timing of this and his bizarre behavior made them think. They found Alfonso in Crookston working on a construction site. This was just a few miles from where Drew's shoe had been found under the bridge. "We're working on a disexperienced gal, and everybody's a suspect until we can rule them out, you know." "What were you doing on Saturday?" "Well, I went to Grand Forks." He admitted to being in Grand Forks, saying he was shopping for clothes and watching a film. They already knew he hadn't purchased any clothes in the mall, and a quick check showed that the film was not being played at the time he said he watched it. "Tell us that you went to the movie theater, but that doesn't really pan out. We're having trouble finding you on the McDonald's videotape. Do you think maybe you were actually somewhere else?" "I don't know. I know I went in the mall." He let them check his car and told them he had nothing to hide. In the back in the glove compartment they found multiple knives, and in a jar of what looked and smelled like cleaning product was a very particular blade. One of the investigators said you could have knocked him over with a feather when he saw it. It was the knife they were looking for that was linked to the sheath found near Drew's tire. Alfonso let them take the knife, still maintaining he had nothing to do with what had happened to Drew. He hadn't even seen her face before. He was allowed to go back to the house he was sharing with his mother, while they continued to pick apart his vehicle and his story. Experts found several spots of blood on the back window and seat. Sadly, it came as little shock when this was a match to Drew's DNA. On December 1st, Alfonso was arrested and charged with kidnapping. They had their suspect, but that was only half the battle. They still had no idea where Drew was, and Alfonso wasn't talking. But one thing was now seemingly confirmed. They would not be bringing Drew home alive. As well as the FBI and other units across state lines, Drew's family had hired a private investigator. But weeks became months, and soon it was the spring of 2004. The weather had been terrible right the way through the search, and some parts thick with snow had taken ages to melt, still hindering the search for her. Mike Headland, a sergeant in the Grand Forks Police Department, said, "I've got 3 daughters, so I thought as a father, if I was there in these people's place, what would I want these investigators to do? I would want them to be on every show that goes out, so maybe that one person might see who might help my daughter out." There were a lot of very short nights with little sleep, and then when I would finally lay down, I would find myself looking at the ceiling wondering, what can we do different? But on April 17th, 2004, Drew Shadeen's family received the call that they were dreading. Her remains had been found in a ravine just outside of Crookston. She was naked from the waist down with her hands bound behind her back. A rope was tied around her neck, which held the remnants of a plastic bag that had been placed over her head. So much time had passed that they could not determine exactly how she had died, but they did find that she had been beaten, stabbed, and sexually assaulted. She had several deep lacerations, including a 5.5-inch cut on her neck. The medical examiner concluded that she had died as a result of a neck wound asphyxiation or from exposure to the elements, meaning she could have been left in the cold to die. It was a crime as cruel as they come. Her dad, Alan, said it was an absolutely horrible day, but it was a day of relief. "We knew that Druzy was no longer with us. It had been a tragic end to a huge search. Her funeral could finally be held, and along with Chris, Drew's ex-boyfriend Adam also helped carry her coffin. Both he and Chris had been supporting each other a lot and were part of the same search parties. Because Drew's case took place across state lines, it could be classed as a federal case. Alfonso was charged with murder and was eligible for the death penalty. It would be the first death penalty case in North Dakota in a century. He pleaded not guilty, and after many mental health evaluations, experts concluded he was not only of a sane and sound state of mind when he killed Drew, but he was mentally competent to stand trial. In August 2006, he was unanimously convicted of kidnapping resulting in death. Alfonso was sentenced to death and began serving his time in a maximum security penitentiary in Indiana. In other news tonight, attorneys for a Minnesota man sentenced to death for killing a University of North Dakota student in 2003 are raising questions about evidence presented at trial that the student was raped. Proceedings stretched well into the afternoon today as a death row murderer was appealing the decision. He continued to file appeals all the way up to the Supreme Court. In 2011, as part of his one of appeals, Alfonso made a partial confession. He claimed that he had confused Drew with a college girl that had sexually abused him when he was 6 years old at a church camp. He reported to a psychologist that he immediately experienced a flood of emotions and physiological reactions. He began to dissociate, re-experiencing the abuse of his childhood. He said when she got to her car, she sat in the driver's seat talking on the phone with her head turned. As Alfonso approached, she looked up at him, and by this point he was in a full-blown dissociative state, killing her in a blackout and panicking when he came to. This appeal was also unsuccessful. However, in 2013, as Alfonso sat on death row, he finally admitted that he had not accidentally killed Drew. It was, as everyone already knew, intentional. Tonight we're tracking breaking news in the long-time murder case of Drew Shadin, a Minnesota native and North Dakota college student. Convicted killer Alfonso Rodriguez is now admitting that he killed Shadin as he sits on death row. 5 Eyewitness News reporter Jessica Miles is working to get new details tonight. She joins us live from the newsroom with the latest. Jess. Bill, a 416-page motion was filed in U.S. court in Fargo today, and in it, 2 medical experts who interviewed Rodriguez back in June concluded he was sane when he killed Drew Shadin 10 years ago. Shadin was 22 years old when she was kidnapped by knife point from a Crookston mall back on November 22, 2003. Her body was found that next spring in a ravine a mile west of Crookston. The new documents out today reveal Rodriguez didn't kill her by accident, as he has maintained while on death row. The documents also give chilling new details about how he chose her as a victim. It goes into more detail about how he killed her, and how he also placed a bag over her head when she began to bleed from the mouth to prevent blood from spilling into the car. His appeals have been denied all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but under what is considered now a death row prisoner's last appeal, Rodriguez, with a new set of 4 attorneys, 2 of them here in the cities, is making a habeas corpus appeal, basically claiming he is being wrongfully held. In a 400-page document, he admitted to everything. He said that he had followed her out, and as she was on her phone putting her key into the ignition, he opened the passenger side door. He attacked her, and as she started to bleed from her mouth, he placed a bag over her head. He then forced her into his car, bound her arms, and sexually assaulted her before she died, and he dumped her body in the snow. Drew's mother said she had no interest in knowing what else was in the lengthy document, saying it changed little anyway. It was obvious he was doing it for himself, and not because he felt any feelings of remorse. Now, I just spoke with Drew's mom, Linda Walker, just moments ago on the phone. She said she doesn't want to know what is all in this document here. This 416-page document, but had this to say about Rodriguez. He's an evil person, Jessica, and evil people tend to always want to use each and every opportunity to shine spotlight on himself, and he does not want to be executed. So he's using each and every opportunity given to him to ensure that that doesn't happen. Linda says what we need to remember today is the victims, Drew and others. Now we know Rodriguez is appealing, and we understand he has a court appearance coming up in December. To everybody's shock, in 2021, Alfonso had his sentence overturned, meaning he no longer faced the death penalty. I can't imagine, it just aches to hear something like this. Tonight, reaction after the sentence was overturned for the man convicted of kidnapping and killing a UND college student nearly 2 decades ago. Convicted sex offender Alfonso Rodriguez no longer faces the death penalty. A judge found that his constitutional rights were violated during the trial by a misleading testimony from the coroner, failure of lawyers to outline the possibility of an insanity defense, and evidence of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Bob Heels, who was the family's private investigator, said he was beyond disappointed as it set such a bad precedent for similar cases. Extremely disappointed. I just paused and had the whole situation flash my mind. This happened 18 years ago. This case is an extreme example of why we have the death penalty for cases like this. If you're not going to use it in a case like this, then where are you going to use it? He also says hearing the news of the sentencing being overturned is very difficult for him, especially on a case that still tugs at his heart. I think my 37-year career, this is the one that sticks out in my mind, is something I'll absolutely never forget. What he did was just one of the most horrific things that somebody can ever imagine. This should have been over a long time ago. On May 18, 2023, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Wednesday, November 22nd, officially marks the 20-year anniversary of when Grand Forks resident Drew Shadin went missing, shocking the community, the region, and the nation. There wasn't a whole lot going on in the nation right then, but the nation had their eyes on Grand Forks, North Dakota. I've never seen anything like that. East Grand Forks Police Chief Mike Hudlin was the PIO for the Grand Forks Police Department when she went missing. Her face is ingrained in my mind. Drew's absolutely is. He said in the time since Shadine's disappearance, he notices the community has never forgotten her. When I do those school talks, I'll say, who's heard of Drew Shadine? And I've yet to have a class where nobody raises their hand. And these are kids anywhere from, like I said, elementary school on up to high school age or even college. They've always heard, and it's now 20 years, and there's people that weren't born, and they've heard of Drew Shadine. But Shadine's memory lives on in more ways than one, including in a scholarship for young women who attend UND. I mean, Drew's death was a tragedy to her family, to UND, to the greater Grand Forks community, and really the nation. This scholarship is a way to honor her legacy and to ensure that her memory is not forgotten. It has been more than 20 years since Drew was abducted and murdered, but it's clear that her case is still ever present in people's minds. Her dad, Alan, said he listens to the final voicemails she left on his phone frequently, and her mom, Linda, said she strives every day to keep the promises she made to Drew. The first one was to bring her home, which she did. She also promised to dedicate her time to carry on doing the things that she never ever wanted to do, like public speaking, lobbying politicians, talking to reporters, and attending court hearings. The then President George W. Bush also signed Drew's law, and this saw the creation of the Drew Shadine National Sex Offender Public Registry. This is an unprecedented public safety resource that provides the public with access to sex offender data nationwide, as well as the database you're able to report cases of sexual abuse and get access to educational papers and Q&S. A scholarship was set up in her name. A sculpture of a tree based on one of Drew's drawings marks her grave, and a little garden was made for her too. Wherever you look in her community, even all of these years on, you can find Drew. She is still very much a part of everything. Story 2. November 9th, 2007, Missouri. A search for a missing child had been going on for the last few days. A 9-year-old girl had gone missing from her bedroom on the 3rd of November, and the small community of Stella, where she had vanished from, was frantic with worry. All leads were going nowhere, and nobody knew where she was or what had happened. That was until a tip came in. The officers were told to head over to Fox Cave in McDonald County. Fox Cave was described as being more of a sinkhole than a cave. It was roughly 30 feet away from the road and in a densely wooded area. Deputies Mike Hall and Jake Bowles headed over to conduct a search, and 20 feet below ground, they found something on a ledge. A child's body. Stella, Missouri had a population of less than 200 people. One of those who called it home was Rowan Ford. 9-year-old Rowan was born on the 11th of April, 1998. She was in the 4th grade and was hardworking and happy. She loved to read and draw and would spend time outside on her bike. She also loved going to church and would often get up early to help the pastor set up. She'd always be sitting smiling on the steps when he arrived. She went to Sunday school and was also part of the Angel Food Ministries. She adored Barbie, and her pink bedroom reflected that love too. But it wasn't always easy for Rowan. She often had lice, her hair would be matted, and she sometimes went to school without socks despite the freezing temperatures of Missouri's winters. In spite of this, she was an extremely hard-working student whom teachers loved having in their class. She always tried her best, even with subjects she found challenging, like mathematics, for example. One teacher said she was just a little ray of sunshine, just the sweetest girl you would ever meet. Rowan was the youngest of 5 children. She was shy and would sometimes hide behind her older sister. But when she opened up, it's like the whole room lit up, her sister said. Rowan, she was something very special. There was nobody that did not like her. She lived with her mother, 44-year-old Colleen, and her stepfather, David Spears, who was 25 years old. David was not only a stepfather, but a father too. In 2005, he had been ordered to pay $209 in child support, but it was unclear if he saw his child. Colleen worked at Walmart, and when she arrived home, Rowan would always be waiting to greet her, running out into the driveway to find out how her shift had gone. But on the 3rd of November, 2007, Rowan wasn't there. Colleen headed inside. Perhaps Rowan was in her bedroom, absorbed in a book, which she often was. But she wasn't there either. She wasn't inside the property. She asked her husband, David, who had been asleep on the sofa, where she was. He said she was at a friend's house. He didn't know which friend, though. Colleen wanted to notify the police immediately, but David insisted she was at a friend's house. As Colleen sat with David for a few hours and waited for a phone call, someone telling her that she was there. The silence was deafening. The call wasn't coming. They then started searching the local area, but she was nowhere to be found. Rowan was officially reported as a missing person at 6:50 p.m. An Amber Alert was issued, and an enormous search was quickly underway, with many and Stella coming out to help. The community turned out in their droves to look for her. Whenever a child goes missing, every second counts, and time was ticking if they were going to find Rowan. The first thing they needed to do was understand where she was the previous night, who she had been with, and crucially, who had been the last person or persons to see her. Her mother had been working the overnight shift at Walmart, so Rowan had been in the care of her stepfather, David. David told the investigators that he had gone out with his friends, Christopher and Nathan, on the night of November 2nd. He had left her there on her own, as she was sleeping on her bedroom floor. He said that he had got home at around midnight, but didn't check on Rowan, but this story would later change. He told investigators he had actually gone out for a second time at around 1:30 a.m. He had called his mom and asked if he could borrow her sport utility vehicle. His mom said that she watched television while she waited for him to get back. She didn't check on Rowan. For the authorities, one thing wasn't sitting right. David was not being cooperative in explaining where he had been that night and why he had been gone for hours. He said it was wrong of him to leave her alone and that he had initially not told investigators this, as he was worried that they would think he was involved. He didn't report her missing until 8 or 10 hours after she was gone, which we thought was extremely strange, said Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings. His story changed several times. We caught him in several lies. To get a better picture of what had happened, they needed to talk to Nathan and Christopher to see if their stories matched. The investigator spoke to Nathan, and he said the three of them, him, Christopher, and David, had met at a farm where they were working. That night they had headed over to a liquor store and then went home to play pool. Colleen had gone to work at around 8:30 p.m., and as the evening carried on, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home, and David went with them, leaving Rowan alone at the property. When they got to Christopher's trailer, they continued to drink as they had bought more alcohol on the way there, and they also smoked marijuana. Around an hour later, Nathan and David left to head home, and Nathan took the back roads instead of going on the highway. He didn't want to be stopped by the police and be caught driving under the influence. Nathan dropped David, and then was back home by midnight. On the 4th of November, the following day, David's friend Christopher Collins, whom he had been with on the night Rowan was last seen, spoke to deputies and told them the same thing that Nathan had, but he left out the part about them smoking marijuana. He said he had remained in his trailer and went to sleep. He hadn't spoken to David, and he had no idea that Rowan was missing. The following day, the FBI came on board to help with the investigation, and the community of Stella carried on looking for her. Dozens of officers from 3 separate counties worked alongside 50 specialists, the Missouri State Highway Patrol, and FBI agents in the search for her. While deputies continued talking to David, technicians from the FBI seized his vehicle and his mother's vehicle as he had borrowed it from her that night. At the same time, deputies from Newton County went to Christopher's work and asked if he could answer some more questions. He agreed and drove to the sheriff's office. He also agreed to do a polygraph test and a computer voice stress analysis, a CVSA, a system that analyzes one's voice in an attempt to ascertain as to whether or not they're being truthful. He maintained he didn't know anything about where Rowan was and offered to help look for her. That afternoon, Wheaton Chief of Police Clinton Clark was out in Wheaton. As part of a routine patrol, Chief Clark had known Christopher for 17 years. Christopher trusted him and would turn to him for help and support, including when his mother passed away. Christopher flagged him down and told him that Rowan had disappeared and he was helping in the search for her. Chief Clark said that Christopher was not his normal self and was kind of excited. Following this, Chief Clark told the FBI that Christopher had spoken to him about Rowan going missing. He was of the belief that Christopher knew something. He said he would help in any way he could, and the FBI asked him to continue talking to Christopher. Christopher would also tell the FBI that he believed David was involved in Rowan's disappearance and offered to wear a wire to aid in the investigation. He even gave suggestions as to where they should look for Rowan. Her disappearance had hit this small community extremely hard and had understandably left many scared and confused. A teacher from the school, Tammy Marshall, recalled the last day she saw Rowan, the day she vanished. She noticed that Rowan's hair was in need of brushing, so they spent 30 minutes before class brushing her hair and putting it into a neat ponytail. Later on in the day, Tammy went looking for Rowan to see if her hair was still okay. She was by herself, and she just went skipping by. She looked so happy as she skipped by me, like everything was great with her. David, Christopher, and Nathan were considered persons of interest, as they were the last people to see her. Christopher was described as cooperative, concerned, and polite by the investigators. Later that evening, he went to see Colleen to see how the search was going and to offer his help. David and Christopher were longtime friends. That year, Christopher had actually moved in with the family for a few months, living in their basement. He would help Rowan with her schoolwork, and she even called him Uncle Chris. Christopher was also a father. He had 3 children under the age of 10, and they lived with their mother in Arkansas. In October 2007, Christopher moved to his family's farm and lived on the property in a trailer. The 6th of November, 3 days since Rowan was reported missing. The focus of the investigation was now on David Spears. He had been interviewed several times, and the house had been searched. By early evening, Christopher had gone to Chief Clark's office to tell him that he had been spoken to by the FBI and had given them ideas of places to look. Chief Clark believed that Christopher had something on his mind and said that he appeared to be apprehensive. Christopher wouldn't meet his eyes, which was very unusual. Chief Clark got in touch with the FBI and told him about the conversation. The FBI thought that if Christopher was involved and needed to confess, he would likely do it to Chief Clark. So they encouraged him to help in the investigation, and Chief Clark agreed. On the 7th of November, Christopher went to the Newton County Sheriff's Department to meet with the FBI, and he agreed to give a swab for DNA testing. He also agreed to have his home and a safe he had at David's home searched. He told the FBI that an alibi that David had given for the night Rowan went missing was not true. As the interview carried on, Christopher continued to become increasingly nervous and emotional when asked about the missing child. He told the agents that he would not be prepared to talk to them anymore if they were going to accuse him of being involved in her going missing. And with that, the interview ended. That evening, he went to see Chief Clark and was very upset about the interview. He said he was going to dummy up about anything else, and added that he might need to get a lawyer. Chief Clark explained to him that he was well within his rights to do that, but added that Christopher should do anything to help find Rowan. It wasn't in his interest to stop cooperating with the investigation. Christopher told him, "If I have anything else to say, I'll talk to you." Chief Clark knew how important it was to follow all procedures, so was sure to remind him of his Miranda rights. Christopher signed a waiver form and continued to talk. Chief Clark explained he felt Christopher had something on his mind and asked if he knew anything about what had happened to Rowan. Christopher suddenly started to cry. He said he would not have done anything to hurt her and that he loved her. At this point in the conversation, someone came in and interrupted it. Christopher got up quickly and left. Chief Clark again let the FBI know about what had happened and said he thought that Christopher was reaching his breaking point. He believed he was going to get a lawyer soon. The following day, Chief Clark spoke in more depth to the FBI about Christopher Collins, his family life, and his relationship with him. He said he thought Christopher knew something about what had happened, but thought they would need to find her body first. The FBI explained that when Rowan's body was found, they wanted him to be the person who talked to Christopher, and the next day, a major break would come in that would confirm the worst fears of all involved. David and Christopher had both worked for the Newton County coroner Mark Bridges in the coroner's automotive business. Chris was a mechanic and David could do a little mechanic work and worked in sales, Bridges said. He was a jack of all trades, so to speak. Mark was on duty the day she was reported missing, and said this was when David had first contacted him. "I guess he first thought I used to be the sheriff and could help," he said. David kept telling me, "Maybe she's at a friend's house." Mark said he spent the 8th of November with David looking for Rowan. The FBI had him wired up and also had a plane flying overhead that was following them. He took David out and tried to find where she was. He asked David to play devil's advocate, as if Christopher was responsible for whatever had happened. I said I would suspect Chris might be involved with this, and if you were Chris, what would you do with Rowan's body? And he thought a minute. I said, let's go look. Let's go look some places. So we went and looked, and the first place he took me to was the hole in the ground. What was the hole in the ground? Fox Cave. I saw some items that brought some suspicions to me, Mark said. I wasn't sure what they were. David and I had a conversation about it at the time. I definitely wanted to search the cave, and I think subconsciously that David did too. He took me to the cave for a reason. The FBI then got in touch with the McDonald County Sheriff's Department, and on the 9th of November at roughly 8 a.m., Deputies Mike Hall and Jake Bowles headed over to conduct a search. 20 feet below ground, they found a body on a ledge. A child's body. I wasn't there when the body was discovered, but I don't think anyone had any question that it was a homicide, said Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings. When the autopsy results came back, it confirmed that Rowan had been raped. She had died as a result of strangulation. Her body had signs of decomposition and small scrapes and bruises that had been inflicted prior to her death. There were also significant injuries to her face that had likely been caused by being thrown into the sinkhole. When Chief Clark tuned into the news on the 9th of November, he heard that Rowan's body had been discovered. He then heard from his office that Christopher had been there and wanted to talk to him. Chief Clark immediately got in touch with the FBI. He told him to find Christopher and tell him that they had found Rowan. But Chief Clark couldn't find him. Then his phone rang. It was the man he was looking for. He asked if law enforcement were following him in a gray minivan, and Chief Clark told him he didn't know anything about surveillance. Christopher explained that he was feeling threatened and nervous, and had been driving all over the area trying to shake it. He was told by Chief Clark to go to the police department, but Christopher wanted to meet him. When they met, he agreed to go with Chief Clark in his patrol car to the police department. "Well, son, it's over. We found Rowan's body this morning." As those words echoed in his ears, Christopher's eyes welled up and his head dropped. The chief thought that David had done something and Christopher knew what it was. He implored him to tell the truth. Christopher looked at him surprised. With all the people in the department, Christopher didn't want to speak with other people around. So they headed to Muncie Bridge, just a few miles outside of Wheaton. Chief Clark made sure to tell law enforcement where they were going. When they got to the bridge, Christopher put his hands out, waiting to be handcuffed. He was told that wasn't necessary, and he replied, "For what I'm about to tell you, you will." As they sat on the slope by the bridge, Christopher told the same story he had done over the previous week, up until Nathan and David left his trailer. He said that yes, they had used the back roads to avoid being caught drunk driving. He said he knew if he was quick, he could go over to Rowan's and get her out of there before Nathan and David got back. Driving down the highway, as this was the quickest route, he was soon at the property. He entered, used the bathroom, and then went into Rowan's bedroom. He picked her up off the floor and then carried her outside as she slept, putting her into his truck. She was still asleep when they got to his trailer. He took her inside, not speaking in case she recognized his voice. After raping her, he said he was going to take Rowan home, holding her arms and having her face away from him as she walked, so as not to see him, but she looked over her shoulder and saw his face. She knew it was him, the man who used to help her with her homework, the man she called Uncle Chris. He said he freaked out, and in a pickup truck near the property, there was some rope in there. He used this to strangle Rowan Ford to death. He said he knew that he was in a lot of trouble, and put her body into the bed of his truck. He said he planned to dump her body off the Muncie Bridge, but decided against it, fearing she would be quickly found there. He drove around thinking of where to dispose of her body, and he eventually settled on Fox Cave. He threw her body into the sinkhole and tried to cover the entrance to the hole with branches, but it was too big. He then drove home. When he arrived, he found blood on his clothes and his mattress. He took her pajama bottoms, underwear, and rope along with his clothes, and put them into a wood stove to burn them and destroy the evidence. He rolled up the mattress and shoved it into a drum. "I got to thinking, now that's going to make a hell of a fire. Somebody's going to see that burning," he said. He then moved the drum to the barn and set it alight. It was an absolutely horrifying story, and knowing now how much Rowan had suffered made a dark situation even worse to think about. Chief Clark went with Christopher back to the police department so that the other law enforcement officials could hear his statement. He was again read his rights, and he repeated his story to the deputies from Berry County and Newton County, who were there with the FBI. He also executed consent to allow his property to be searched. He was then taken to Berry County Sheriff's Department, where he gave his statement again. This time it was videotaped. He added that he had cried like a baby all afternoon and was remorseful. The officers were surprised to hear this confession, as they believed that David had killed Rowan and that Christopher knew about it. Knowing what they knew now, they spoke to David again, and this time he implicated himself, adding another confusing layer. David said he came in, checked in Rowan's room, and found she was gone, Copeland said. He said he knew Chris had gotten her and taken her to his house. He got there and Chris was raping her. He raped her too. Then they thought they would be in trouble, so they killed her and threw her in a hole. He originally stated he was driving around. Now we know they were hauling her body off from the crime scene. David said in his interview with the police that Christopher had handed him the rope and he had killed Rowan. "I choked her with it. I realized she's gone. She's really gone," he said, according to the transcript. They talked to Christopher again and explained what David had said, but Christopher was adamant David had not been involved at any point during the crime or the aftermath. Two people both admitting to being involved, but one denying that the other had anything to do with it. This complex case was just getting more confusing. Partly based on what Christopher had said, the affidavit Barry County Sheriff Nick Epperl sent to the prosecutor said that both had assaulted her, but it was not clear who had strangled her. David Spears and Christopher Collins were each charged with statutory rape, forcible rape, and first-degree murder. Epperl said that he expected prosecutors to file a charge of kidnapping against Christopher, but not David as he was her legal guardian. Both were held without bond in the Barry County Jail. Myrna Davis's mother would later talk to her son as he sat in jail, and he again said that he had taken part in the crime, saying he had blacked out and his memories of what had happened had only just started coming back. "He's my one and only," Myrna said, tearing up. "He's all torn up. He really did love her." Christopher's brother Greg said he didn't believe it. "I don't believe he could do something like this. He's got 3 kids of his own." The two appeared in court in Cassville in Barry County, Missouri. The two were arrested on Monday, 3 days after Roland Ford's body was found about 10 miles from her home. According to investigators, both men have admitted taking part in the crime, but today in court entered pleas of not guilty. Today Spears and Collins were heavily guarded, wearing both wrists and leg shackles. Ford's mother Colleen Spears was also in court today, joined by several family members. While many in the community of Stella continue to grieve and hope for justice, they did not attend court proceedings this morning. "I wanted to, but my heart wouldn't let me. I didn't want to go over there and look at those 2 guys." On the 27th of November, Colleen filed for divorce from David. Bill Alsop, the village mayor, said she was too upset to speak to the media. "She's numb. She's trying to keep herself busy. She's in there right now on the sewing machine, sewing something for her baby's funeral." The morning before her funeral, those from Rowan's school planted a pink dogwood tree in her memory, and balloons were released with notes attached to them from her classmates. An angel was also placed there marking her birthday and the day she was found. More than 300 people attended her funeral at Gospel Lighthouse Church, and her favorite hymn, "The Old Rugged Cross," was sung. The pastor urged those to put their hate and anger aside in the wake of Rowan's death. David Spears and Christopher Collins would enter pleas of not guilty. Christopher was bound over for trial, meaning that the court found there was probable cause and the matter was transferred to the trial court. Due to the publicity and the intense media scrutiny, David's lawyers requested that the trial be moved out of Barry County to Pulaski County instead, and this was granted as he and Christopher were being tried separately. This meant that the court could be changed. With a case as complex as this, it would be a few years before they would head to trial. Then came some breaking news. After conversations and consultation with the Attorney General's office, and following new evidence from an independent lab, the charges of statutory rape, forcible rape, and first-degree murder against David Spears were dropped. A plea deal was reached with the Barry County prosecuting attorney Johnny Cox, and David was sentenced to 4 years for hindering prosecution and 7 years for endangering the welfare of a child. Both sentences were the maximum allowed for each offense. The prosecuting attorney said that it was not an easy decision, referencing that David had spoken about being involved in the rape and murder soon after his initial arrest. "This case has almost consumed the resources of my office for the last 4 years and 10 months. Over the course of that time, his case has been pending. Evidence other than his statement has been pursued to be used to prove David Spears was involved in the rape and murder of Rowan Ford. During that time, no additional evidence implicating Mr. Spears has been developed." He said that the analysis and testing of evidence did not implicate David, and the results were not consistent with his original statement. This evidence included a rape test kit, which was taken during the autopsy, and then analyzed by the state police lab and the FBI lab, and then later the independent lab. The results from the independent lab were consistent with Christopher's account of what had happened that night. Cox also noted that there were inconsistencies with David's statement that he had strangled Rowan. The lack of physical evidence that would be able to be used in court has created serious concerns and uncertainty about the statement David Spears gave to law enforcement. He said, "Christopher had always denied that anyone else was involved in Rowan's murder. and he had said this during his first interview and his last interview. During every statement made to law enforcement, Christopher Collins admitted he had strangled Rowan Ford, Cox said. Cox was concerned about having to argue that Christopher's statement was an accurate representation of what had happened that night, whilst also having to present David's account and argue that was true when they contradicted each other in the ways that they did. Another worry was that it could have created a way for David's case to be overturned if he was convicted of the more serious offenses, and also paved the way for Christopher's case to be overturned too. Cox said that neither outcome was acceptable to the state. This type of crime should outrage everyone, he said. I was outraged when I first heard about it. However, as a prosecutor, I am a minister of justice and must do what the law requires, what the facts require, and what fairness and justice require. Sheriff Robert M. Vinson believed that Cox had made the right choice. There was no physical evidence that would have supported convicting David Spears, he said. So as hard as it was for the prosecuting attorney, he did what he had to do. Adding, he swore he acted alone. The evidence indicated Collins was the perpetrator. Spears' confession was similar, but there were several inconsistencies with the evidence, suggesting Collins committed it. But it still left questions unanswered. As Vinson said, why would someone confess to such a horrible crime? That's the question the public has, and there's no good explanation for that. I agree with the prosecutor's decision. I really questioned whether he was ever guilty. I knew the case was going to be horrible. He could have gotten acquitted. Christopher Collins would later file a motion to suppress, which aimed to exclude evidence from all of his statements taken by the investigators during the investigation and the evidence taken from his property, trailer, truck, and body. He was overruled. The trial of Christopher Collins would last for a week. During his trial, his lawyers said that Christopher had many problems and was unable to form emotional attachments to people due to severe neglect from his parents and trauma from being in foster care. Christopher was the youngest of 6 children, and all of them would end up in the foster care system due to their parents' criminal activities and substance abuse issues. He would later go on to become a father, but his issues with drugs and alcohol would cause massive problems. His trial lawyers told the court that he had never intended to kill Rowan, and asked the jury to set aside the terrible crime scene and autopsy photos and Rowan's age and focus on the law and the facts which they said showed that this had not been planned. I took her back outside, still with no clothing on from the waist down. How painful would that injury have been? Very painful. One of the people that the court would hear from was Colleen, Rowan's mother. After you learned she had been killed, what kind of impact did that have on you at the time? Asked the prosecutor. Totally devastated myself. And my other children, she replied. Rowan's sister said that when she heard she had been murdered, she collapsed to the floor, saying that everybody in the family went into a deep depression. Finally, this traumatic trial had reached its end, and on the 20th of March, the jury returned their verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Christopher Collins, guilty of murder in the first degree. As this was a case where the death penalty was on the table, the penalty phase was going to be crucial. During the penalty phase of the proceedings, the state presented 6 victim impact statements from witnesses. Christopher's team presented 2 witnesses who testified about David being potentially involved in Rowan's murder. An expert in human development also stated that he had been severely emotionally neglected during the first 6 months of his life, which had stunted his development. The expert said that Christopher had a confusion in how he connected with other people, which resulted in a diagnosis of severe disorganized dissociative attachment disorder and intermittent explosive personality disorders. After the penalty phase was concluded, the jury recommended a death sentence. What followed was a series of appeals. On July 23, 2012, Christopher's lawyers filed a notice of appeal of the death penalty with the Missouri Supreme Court. Appeals such as these are automatic under Missouri law when dealing with a capital punishment case. His appeal was denied. In 2014, Christopher appealed against his sentence again and tried to get it reduced to life in prison. This was rejected. Christopher filed a writ of habeas corpus with the Missouri Supreme Court. If this was granted, it would allow him to present evidence that the government didn't disclose that one of their primary witnesses had a criminal record, Wheaton Chief Clinton Clark, which he had received when he was serving in Vietnam. The prosecution said that if Chief Clark's record was disclosed, this would not have changed the outcome. As the appeals continued, what had happened to David Spears? He had served more than 7 years in custody and was released in 2015. Shortly after his release from prison, but not before the end of his probation, He was hired by his trial attorney's husband and worked at the Missouri State Public Defender's Office. He would work there for a year and 8 months before the end of his probation. The Public Defender's Office had served as counsel for both Christopher and David. Christopher's lawyers argued that because David had worked for the Public Defender's Office, this had created a conflict of interest and prevented their client from pleading guilty to lesser charges. In their pleadings, his lawyers said that a potential conflict existed. However, because of their divided loyalties or fear of Mr. Collins' response to the conflict, counsel failed to alert the court or alert Mr. Collins of the conflict. Because of this non-disclosure, Mr. Collins himself was not aware of the claim until after his post-conviction proceedings had concluded. A clemency petition was submitted for Christopher, which argued he suffered from a brain abnormality, which led to functional deficits in awareness, judgment, and deliberation, adding that he had also been sexually abused as a child. The result was a damaged human being with no guidance on how to grow into a functioning adult, the petition said. The clemency petition said that David Spears had implicated himself, and the transcript of his statement to the police said that he had told the police that Christopher had given him the rope and he had taken Rowan's life. The Missouri Supreme Court sets an execution date for a man accused of raping and murdering a 9-year-old girl in southwest Missouri. In 2012, a jury convicted Christopher Collins of the 2007 abduction, rape and murder of Rowan Ford of Stella, Missouri. Investigators say Collins threw Ford's body into a sinkhole in McDonald County. The Supreme Court today set his execution for December 3rd. Christopher Collins' fate was sealed when the United States Supreme Court denied his appeal, and Governor Mike Parson turned down his clemency request. Parson had used to be a sheriff and had overseen 12 executions. He had never granted clemency. Christopher was set to be put to death on the 3rd of December, 2024 via an injection of the sedative pentobarbital. Several people who had worked on investigating the crime, including Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings, he said he felt the impending execution was a long time coming. I was hoping the state would come while I was still in office. I put in a request to attend the execution. I felt like it was the right thing to do for Rowan. He also said that there would never be complete justice for her. I'd like to have seen more done and some of the rest of the prosecution, but this is how it came out. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad to finally see the date set. December 3rd, 2024. The day of Christopher's execution had arrived. At 5:54, the execution witnesses were moved into place. These included for members of his legal team, for members of the media, 8 witnesses from the state, and 2 representatives for Rowan's family. At 6 p.m., the Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey let the Department of Corrections know that there were no legal challenges to carrying out the execution. 9 minutes later, 49-year-old Christopher Collins was declared dead. Christopher had given a written statement to be read out after his execution. Right or wrong, I accept this situation for what it is. To anyone that I have hurt in this life, I am sorry. I hope you are able to get closure and move on. Regardless which side of this situation that you are on, you are in my prayers, and I hope to see you in heaven one day. Following the execution of Christopher Collins, Sheriff Jennings said that he felt that the system had let Rowan down. Unfortunately, there were a lot of hotlines made about her situation, but unfortunately law enforcement was never called. I'd like to think we would have removed her from that situation. If we were aware of it, it is some closure, I suppose, to see this case come to an end. There is some justice. It's only partial justice, but I'll take what I can get. It's one of those cases that you never forget. Mick Epperly says the case sent shockwaves through southwest Missouri. It's just terrible. And someone to take a life and throw him down into a cave like a piece of dirt, it's terrible. Do you feel like justice has been served with this? I think it has. She didn't deserve any of this. It'll give some satisfaction to the family that maybe he got what he deserved. For so many that were involved in this case, it is one that will simply never leave them. Sheriff Jennings said it was a horrendous crime, and in his 44 years he had worked a lot of homicides, and this was the one that had the biggest effect on him. I have Rowan's school ID here. I've carried it in my pocket ever since this incident happened. I'll continue to carry it in my pocket after this. He explained that her case had impacted how they investigated crimes against children. We work a lot of cases of child abuse and child neglect in Newton County. We always make sure that child safety is of the utmost concern. We hate taking children from homes, but if there's any question at all, we do it. We always think back on this incident here. The impact of Rowan's murder was still widely felt by her community. One of her teachers, Todd Holt, who had testified at the trial, couldn't bring himself to clear out her desk for a while after her death. She's the kind of kid that I think every school teacher could want. I mean, she showed up at school, and it was all about work. It was all about what Rowan was going to do to be able to get ahead in life. Rowan's best friend was a boy called Tyler. Tyler's mother would recall how the two of them would be together, and Rowan's shy personality would help keep her energetic son calm. It's the closest thing I've known to losing my own child. For quite a while, my son couldn't sleep alone. He still talks about her. For her older sister, the memories and love of Rowan remain. I am so proud of the girl she was turning out to be. Story 3. Very tragic, and I couldn't imagine going through that as a mother. It's just, I'm speechless. I don't know what to think right now. Today's case takes us to Arkansas in the United States. As a little girl spoke to child care specialists, recounting the horrific abuse she had suffered at the hands of her father and stepmother, it would be the beginning of a very high-profile case. 6-year-old Jersey Bridgman had been forced to sleep on the floor and tied to a dresser with a belt after getting up to get some food. The police had initially been notified about potential abuse in the home in Rogers after Jersey had been seen tied to the dresser with a silver chain that appeared to be a dog collar. Jersey's parents, David and Desiree, were no longer together, but they did share custody. Everything was fine at her mother's house, but at her father's house, it was a very different story. Her father and stepmother were arrested and went in court. Her father admitted that he had tied her up with a belt, but said that it was to stop her from getting into things she shouldn't. Rogers Police Detective Larry Taylor wrote in the court affidavit. He said he thinks she may be sleepwalking and that they had discussed buying a child gate, but since he does not have a job, they could not afford to buy one at that time. Her father said he had initially cut a belt to go around her ankle, and after she had escaped from it, a lock had also been added. When Jersey said that the belt was hurting her leg, rather than realizing the cruelty of this and stopping, it was simply moved to her waist. In late 2011, her father David and stepmother Jana were arrested. David would later plead guilty to permitting the abuse of a minor, false imprisonment, and endangering the welfare of a minor. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Her stepmother pleaded guilty to the same charges and was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment and 3 years for a probation revocation. After this, Jersey was in the care of her biological mother full-time. She also started kindergarten at Sugar Creek Elementary, and in March 2012, Jersey and her family moved to 608 SEA Street. Next door to the family was Amanda and Zachary Holly, a couple who had only recently got married. Amanda and Desiree were best friends. A fresh start and living next to your best friend seemed to be the perfect combination. Jersey was described as a very sweet girl who was always full of joy. Even though she was just 6, she had already gone through so much. I don't know how she dealt with it, but she dealt with it and she still smiled the whole time, a family friend said. Jersey loved being a big sister, doting on her little sister Leah. Things were finally looking up for Jersey. November 20th, 2012. Bentonville, Arkansas. 6 days after Jersey's birthday, 6:43 a.m. Officers were responding to a 911 call from 608 East A Street. A little girl had been reported missing. Jersey Bridgman. Her mother Desiree said that the previous evening she had been at work, getting home at around 11 p.m. on the 19th of November. Her boyfriend had also been working, so Jersey and her little sister had spent the evening at their neighbors, Zachary and Amanda's house, number 702. They would often babysit when she or her boyfriend had to work. After arriving home, she went to the Hollies to collect her children, with Zachary carrying Jersey back to her mother's house, while Desiree carried Jersey's little sister, who was only 2 years old. The sisters were put in the same bed. Jersey briefly woke and told her mom that she loved her, to the moon and back. Her favorite way of expressing love. When Desiree woke the next morning, she went into the bedroom. Jersey was not there. She was nowhere in the house. She called her mother and explained that she couldn't find Jersey anywhere, and her mother ran through the usual places to look. Was she under the bed or hiding in a closet? Possibly. She wasn't. Her mother knew that she needed to call 911. Before calling, she looked out of her window and saw Amanda sitting on her front porch. Amanda hadn't seen Jersey either. The police had wasted no time in getting to the house. Whenever a child is reported missing, literally every second counts. They didn't know when during the night or the early hours of the morning she had disappeared, so a search was one of the first priorities. The Bridgman house was searched, as was the Hollis house next door, but Jersey wasn't found in either of them. There were no signs of a forced entry. As the search found out, Officer Travis Nichols noticed something. The back door to number 704 was open. He, along with Officer Mike Henson, headed over to the property and looked inside. It was a vacant property with just some rubbish on the floor. Carefully they went in, and when they came to the bedroom, they found a body on the floor. They quickly left the property and sealed it off, securing it for a search warrant. Vicky Jersey's grandmother had arrived and asked the visibly distraught officer if Jersey was in there. He couldn't answer and just looked at her. She said she knew at that moment that it was not good news. Jersey Bridgman's naked body was found in the bedroom closet, 2 doors down from where she had lived. She was face down with pajama pants wrapped tightly around her neck 3 times. Desiree's dad was given the utterly horrific task of identifying her body. While they waited for the search warrant to come through, Desiree was interviewed by Detective Corporal J.C. Wiseman to try and put together a timeline of events. She explained that when she had gone into the bedroom at 6:38 a.m. Jersey was not there or anywhere else in the property. And that was all she knew. As the street was blocked off and the media descended, people could not believe what they were hearing. They were desperate for answers, but details were few and far between. A small bike lay in front of the house where she lived. A deflated balloon covered in princesses was also nearby, a picture of childhood innocence. The police had no suspects and very little to work with, so with the assistance of the FBI, several known sex offenders in the area were interviewed. A police captain said that anyone who was close to Jersey was going to be looked at. We also know that the FBI is now in on the investigation with Bentonville police to try and solve the case. Several people have been interviewed and 3 homes were searched in the neighborhood where Jersey's body was found. Police say even though no one has been arrested yet, the investigation is moving quickly. I feel confident that we've taken steps that we need to take as quickly as possible, and I feel confident that the answers to all of our questions are within reach. Even still though, we are now 2 days out and details about the killing are vague. We don't know who exactly police have interviewed so far or really how they even know this is a murder investigation. They still haven't told us how the little girl died or if her body showed any signs of abuse. Obviously this case is too important for the family. It's too important for the community. You know, it's too important to everyone. Police also say the holiday weekend will not put any kind of delay on their investigation. The neighborhood here really shook up about this while the girl's body was found inside an abandoned house behind me. The house is difficult to see with the light, but it's behind these series of trees here, and police have been here all night. They're still here this morning. The chief here in Bentonville is calling this a homicide, and the work to find the person or persons responsible for this crime continues this morning. Here's what we know so far. Investigators collected evidence outside this house most of the day Tuesday after the 6-year-old was reported missing, then found 2 doors down from where she lived. This morning we expect officers will deliver even more evidence to the state crime lab in Little Rock, and we've confirmed they're waiting on a warrant to gather more clues in this neighborhood. We do have several residents of interest on Southeast A Street as seen behind us here, and of course that residence is not the only one. And we're working on either search warrants or other methods to be able to thoroughly inspect those residences. But there are a lot of questions that we have this morning, and investigators aren't saying much at all this morning. We're hoping to learn exactly what happened to this little girl, and we also want to know how close officers are to making any arrests. One of those interviewed was Amanda Holly. Her story matched Desiree's. She had looked after Jersey the night before, and Jersey had gone home with her mom. Another person they spoke to was her husband, Zachary. I remember looking at the time. It was 3:35 p.m. My stomach churned. I was going to eat more to get some mental vision. 28-year-old Zachary lived with Amanda and her son. He worked at a local restaurant and did have a criminal record. He had been arrested for 3 times before, once for public intoxication and twice for contempt of court. He had had a very tough childhood as his mother had struggled with drug abuse, and he had also suffered appalling physical and sexual abuse as well as neglect. He said that he had woken up at 3:35 a.m. with an upset stomach, and he had walked to the nearby Easy Mart, just 150 yards away, for some Pepto-Bismol. CCTV footage was able to corroborate this. He told police that after he had returned home, he went to sleep. He then said he had woken up at 6:30 a.m. and got his 4-year-old stepson ready to go to school. Just 10 minutes later, Desiree had told Amanda that she couldn't find Jersey anywhere, and after being unable to find her, Desiree had called 911. But she was so upset, she had handed the phone over to Amanda as she couldn't talk. Desiree then went over to the Easy Mart to tell her boyfriend that Jersey had gone missing. This was the same Easy Mart that Zachary had gone to. Zachary denied any involvement and was cooperative with the investigation. He handed over his clothes that he had been wearing the night before and gave a sample of his DNA to the police. They were also able to confirm that Desiree's boyfriend Brandon had been at work at the time. As the morning progressed, they got the warrant and began searching 704. Her body was removed and sent to the Arkansas State Crime Lab, and an autopsy was performed the following day on Wednesday, the 21st of November. When thinking about Zachary's story, they wondered if his trip to the Easy Mart was possibly a bid to give himself an alibi, so they spoke to him again. 2 more search warrants were also executed, one for Jersey's home and also one for Zachary and Amanda's. Zachary explained that he and his wife would babysit Jersey and her sister until their mom got home from work. This was nothing unusual. When the results of the autopsy came out, it sickened even the most hardened of investigators. 6-year-old Jersey had died from asphyxia. She had also been raped. Those in the crime lab had worked through Thanksgiving to develop a DNA profile from the sperm cells that had been found. Detectives continued interviewing people and collecting DNA samples from persons of interest. The local school district said that they were finalizing a plan to help students cope with the loss and also address her death in a way that they would understand. Counselors were on hand for students and parents to offer guidance and support in how to approach and deal with what had happened. More than 100 people turned out at the Children's Advocacy Center to hold a candlelight vigil with those in attendance clearly devastated. We just wanted to maybe find a way to process our grief and probably a lot of sadness that the community feels. And a lot of the questions that we all have that we don't have any answers to today, and just felt like that this would probably be an appropriate way to do that. There was a unique quality about Jersey, Beverly Engel, the center's executive director said. A little old soul, but such a delight. Friday the 23rd of November, 2012. So just to be absolutely clear, Zach, you've made a decision on your own to do this polygraph, and I'm assuming for the purpose of trying to clear your name. Zachary called Sergeant Chris Moffat. He said he wanted to take a polygraph test. 3 days later, the polygraph results were in, and Zachary was back in the station before he could make it to Jersey's funeral. They also had the DNA back from Jersey's body. The polygraph results indicated deception, meaning that you failed the test. The DNA matches your DNA. He maintained his innocence, but before long he cracked. He also drew a floor plan of the house, showing where he had left her body. That's the hallway. There's the bathroom right there. This was where the strategy of the police had really paid off. They had withheld details from the media and wider public, and these were details that only the killer would know. These were details that Zachary Hawley knew. Zachary Hawley was subsequently arrested. This was the man who had so often cared for Jersey. This was the man who had been seen on the news clips that circulated from the crime scene as he stood by the police tape wearing his stripy blue hat and black jacket. This was the man who had denied any involvement. This was the man who Jersey had called Uncle Zach. L.R. Bentonville police say 28-year-old Zachary Dwayne Hawley was arrested this evening charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and residential burglary. We're outside of his house this morning here at 702 SCA Street. His house is between where Jersey Bridgman lived and where they found her body Tuesday morning. This investigation has been assisted by the Rogers Police Department, the Benton County Sheriff's Office, as well as numerous other local law enforcement agencies that comprise the Benton County Child Abduction Response Team, and the Arkansas State Crime Lab was instrumental in the timely development of this case and this arrest. We didn't actually see any family members in the news conference earlier this evening, but we were informed that the family does know about the arrest. In fact, we saw Chief Simpson at the funeral home there with the family during the visitation earlier, telling them about the arrest, which had been made, letting everyone there know that they were going to hold a press conference tonight. So yes, the family does know. However, we're not sure if any of the folks in the police department here tonight were actually family members of Jersey Bridgman. Back to you. Julie Pickard, who had lived on the other side of the property Jersey's body had been found, and would later say that one day after her body was found, Zachary had cried for a long time. When police visited her later that day, they asked her if she had seen a man wearing Mountain Dew pajama bottoms. Zachary had been wearing those pajama bottoms. Friends and family of Jersey Bridgman are gathered behind me here at Rollins Funeral Home for the visitation, which just got underway a few minutes ago. People paying their respects tonight include administrators from Sugar Creek Elementary, where Jersey was a kindergartner. Earlier today, teachers at the school broke the children and answered any questions they might have. Pam Blair, the school principal, says they did not provide much information to the students other than the facts that Jersey Bridgman died and police are still investigating. Faculty members allowed the students to write and draw pictures about how they were feeling, which helped determine who needed the most intensive counseling. Blair says it was the older students in 3rd and 4th grade who had the toughest time with it. 35 to 40 students needed counseling. Jersey's funeral was held at Bentonville Cemetery, and students and staff at her kindergarten had planned on wearing purple to honor her. Her father was denied permission to leave prison and attend it. Friends, family, and even law enforcement showed up to pay their last respects for 6-year-old Jersey Bridgman. Jersey's funeral procession got a special police escort by the Bentonville Police Department. There's closure a little bit. In time there will be, and I think she'll always be remembered no matter what. Friends say 6-year-old Jersey was a loving little girl. She's been through a lot. She was very quiet, but she always laughed. She had the biggest smile that you could have. She made sure she showed you her teeth. And she loved her parents and all of her family more than anything. Bentonville Police Chief John Simpson said that the details would not be released as to exactly what had happened to Jersey or what had led police to Zachary, nor would details of a motive be released. In the paperwork filed by the prosecutor, it said that Zachary had restrained Jersey with the purpose of engaging in sexual intercourse, deviant sexual activity, or sexual contact with her. The prosecutors also announced that they would be asking the jury to death penalty. The day before he was due in court for the judge to assign him a public defender, authorities said that Zachary Hawley had been attacked in prison. In the county jail where he was being held, an inmate who was there on a parole violation had slipped into his cell whilst giving out clothes and towels. Zachary was not seriously injured, and for many this was what he deserved. More justice will probably be served in Benton County. So as reports showed, he was beaten this morning, and I don't think it's going to be the last. Jail Captain Chris Sparks said obviously this case has gotten a lot of exposure in the media, and all the inmates know what he's in for. We're going to do our best to try and keep him safe, just like we would do every other inmate. As he made his way into court escorted by officers and wearing a prison jumpsuit, he said nothing to the reporters that were waiting for him, and there he was. The man who had been trusted to care for Jersey stood there, charged with kidnapping, residential burglary, murder, and rape was also added to the charges. His arms could be seen visibly shaking as the charges were read out. He was assigned a public defender to represent him, and he was held without bond to await his next appearance in court. He entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. Basically 100% of the time, at a plea hearing, it's going to be a not guilty plea. By going to an arraignment and pleading guilty, basically all you're doing is preventing the state from having to meet their burden against you. Andrew Sheeler is a defense attorney who says a plea deal in this case isn't likely even with the death penalty on the table. In a case as high profile as this, I don't see a plea bargain coming along that would create a situation where the state would not be interested in pursuing the death penalty. It was an emotional day for Jersey's family. Her mother, Desiree Bridgman, was visibly shaken after the short hearing. She left quickly with family members after Hawley entered his not guilty plea. I reached out to Jersey's uncle, who said he would not talk on camera, but did say, quote, "These are hard times," and in Jersey's neighborhood purple ribbons still hang as a tribute to the 6-year-old and a reminder that a community is still mourning. 2 mental evaluations were completed, one by the state hospital for the prosecution and the other for the defense, both of which found him competent to stand trial. The trial would be hit with delays as one of his attorneys announced he would not be continuing with representing him. He said that he could not be effective counsel as he was battling depression and alcohol abuse, and as such he would not be adequately prepared for a trial. This meant that a new public defender would need to be found and appointed in Jersey's family. He was very upset about the delay, but finally his trial would begin. A reporter who was in the courtroom said that Zachary was visibly nervous and on edge during the proceedings. One of those who testified was the state medical examiner, Dr. Frank Peretti. He would demonstrate for the court how Jersey had clawed at the pajama pants she was being strangled with. "I knew the cause of death as soon as I opened the body bag," he said, adding that her hair and a necklace she had made in school were tangled up in the pajama pants. Zachary could be seen shaking in his seat as this was described. The medical examiner explained that she had retinal hemorrhages caused by strangulation. He was asked how the body responded to strangulation, and he explained that there is a panic and it normally takes between 60 and 80 seconds for bleeding in the eyes to start. Maybe there's some pain, and then you eventually black out, he said. He also showed photographs of Jersey's body and her injuries. Understandably, the images evoked powerful emotions in the courtroom as they were extremely confronting and difficult to view. Although the photographs were of course very distressing, they highlighted the depravity of this offense. When the photographs were shown, Zachary showed no emotion. During the trial, those in court would sit in horrified silence as his interview with the police was played. The DNA evidence connecting him to the crime was also presented. One of those to testify was Lisa Channel from the Arkansas State Crime Lab, who said that the hair found on Jersey was not similar to Zachary's, but this was not fully conclusive due to insect damage. The sexual violence that had been inflicted upon her was evident in both the injuries she had sustained and the semen found on her body. Sperm cells were taken from her body and shirt, and Melissa Myhand, the chief forensic DNA examiner, told the jury that Zachary was the main source of the DNA, and it was within scientific certainty that it belonged to him. According to her, DNA consistent with Zachary was found on 2 swabs. I cannot say with all scientific certainty that it is his DNA, she said, but I can say he can't be excluded. Defense attorneys would not call any witnesses during the trial and acknowledged in both the opening and closing remarks that their client was responsible for the death of Jersey Bridgman. Zachary Hawley was subsequently convicted of residential burglary, kidnapping, rape, and murder. His defense's new job was to try and save him from the death penalty. As part of these proceedings, many witnesses were called, including a DHS worker from California, where Zachary had spent a lot of time when he was younger. The defense was trying to demonstrate how Zachary had been abused and neglected, as evidenced by the 15 referrals and investigations that had been made regarding physical and sexual abuse and neglect committed against him when he was a child. He had lived in 9 different homes and changed schools 23 times as his mother fell deeper into drug abuse. The DHS worker said that the system was broken in Zachary and his family had fallen through the cracks. He had only been removed from the home once, but was returned soon after. She added that she felt she and other DHS workers had failed to take the appropriate action to protect him. The task for the jury was massive, deciding whether or not the death penalty was an appropriate punishment. Just reading the instructions to the jury took more than half an hour, and before long the sentence was returned. Zachary Hawley was sentenced to 20 years for residential burglary, 2 life sentences for rape and kidnap, and death for capital murder. One by one the defense told the jury to ensure that this was a unanimous verdict, and one by one they confirmed that it was. After his sentencing, Hawley spoke for the first time in his trial. He said in part, quote, "I sincerely apologize for the pain and suffering I've caused. I hope you can one day find it in your heart to forgive me." He was immediately handcuffed and taken into custody. "I'm going to keep loving my other ones, you know. I'm going to keep going on as a mom. Keep with my little girls, the other 2. It has been pretty much an ongoing funeral. You know, we finally get that we no longer have to remember a bad day. We get to remember, you know, our baby. We get to remember the good times. No longer have to focus on the nightmare." As he sat on death row at Varna's Supermax prison, Zachary Hawley would appeal the sentence. He argued that the judge who had presided over his trial, Benton County Circuit Judge Brad Karen, was incorrect by denying a directed verdict for the charge of residential burglary. He said that the jury should have been informed that he had made an offer to plead guilty to the capital murder charge, as it could have been viewed as an indication that he had accepted responsibility and been considered a mitigating factor. His third and final argument was that his motion to have his statement and confession to the police suppressed was denied. After considering his arguments, his sentence was upheld by the Arkansas Supreme Court as it was deemed not persuasive. The court ruling was good news for Benton County Prosecutor Nathan Smith. While ongoing appeals are common in these cases, I am hopeful that today's decision will make the possibility of putting Jersey Bridgman's family through another trial unlikely. Zachary would later appeal again, claiming he had had ineffective assistance from his lawyers, arguing again that he wanted his conviction and sentence overturned. He also argued that there had not been sufficient evidence presented to the jury about his underlying mental health problems. None of his appeals thus far have been successful. Jersey's father would later give an interview from prison, where he said he had never met Zachary, but he did know of him. He said he was in shock at first and didn't want to believe it. He said his daughter had meant a lot to him, and that his drug use played a huge part in his mistreatment of Jersey. He said that he wasn't a bad person, but had made mistakes. Mistakes he would have to live with for the rest of his life. Jersey Bridgman's story is a harrowing reminder of the vulnerabilities of children and the unspeakable cruelty that some endure. It's truly devastating to think about how she must have suffered, and knowing that it was at the hands of someone she trusted. Jersey deserved to have a chance at life. She deserved to have a chance to grow up. It's a true testament to her character that even in the face of such hard times her light never dimmed, and she never lost her smile. Story 4. 39-year-old Connie Margata Bates lives in Ellington, Connecticut, with her husband, 40-year-old Richard, and two sons, Richard Jr., known as RJ, who was 9 and 6-year-old Connor. Originally from Rockville, she came from a big, loud family. As she got older, throwing parties and gatherings with everyone was something she loved to do. For Connie, having friends and family together, enjoying nice food and playing games, nothing made her happier. Christmas, New Year's, and Halloween. There wasn't a time of year where she wasn't planning something. Many people drifted and out of each other's lives after school and college, but Connie refused to let that happen, often hosting many high school reunions to keep everyone together. She was full of energy and always cheery. Friends said she was the first to offer advice and was there for you in a heartbeat no matter the time of day or how busy she was. One summer at a party, she met Richard Bates, a computer technician. Some people said they wouldn't have typically put them together, but they did work well. The more they all got to know Richard, the more they saw his silly side. He was described as a big kid, someone always looking to make the room laugh. Connie was definitely the same. Richard asked Connie to meet his parents, and his mother said she knew right away that Connie was special. On July 4th, 2003, the couple married and settled into family life in a lovely home on a quiet suburban street, number 7, Birchview Drive. Now having RJ and Connor, Connie's already famous parties were bigger and more elaborate than ever. She wanted the craziest props and decorations, and the most wonderful costumes to surprise her children with. One Easter party, she told all the children that if they threw jelly beans into the garden and went to sleep, they would wake up to find they had all turned into lollipops. As the kids slept, Connie was outside in the dark, raking up all the jelly beans and throwing lollipops around for them to find. She was the definition of an above and beyond person, throwing everything she had into everything she did. She just loved to make people smile. December 23rd, 2015. It was now just 2 days before Christmas. Connie and Richard's house was decorated and the presents were wrapped. Safe to say Connie was very excited for the next few days with her sons. She got the kids ready for school and Richard dropped them there before heading home to change into his work clothes. Connie was getting ready for a spin class herself. Just before 11 a.m. neighbors, also living on the quiet street of Birchview Drive, were suddenly drawn to their windows and doors. All they could hear were sirens and cars speeding down the road, heading to the Bates house. Authorities were responding to their house alarm being set off and a short 911 call. Word began to spread that there had been a home invasion at 7 Birchview Drive. Connie and Richard had been attacked by a masked man who was now on the run. Officers went door to door checking everyone's homes to see if the intruder was in any of them. They told residents to gather everyone in their respective homes, get into a room, and not move until they were told to. Everyone hid, waiting for the all clear. But the news about what had happened inside the Bates house would soon get far worse. Richard had been found tied to a chair and bleeding. He was on the floor with the chair on top of him. Fortunately, he was in an ambulance and stable. Connie, however, had been found shot to death in their basement, shot once in the back of her head and in her stomach. Detectives were confident that the intruder was long gone and residents could start leaving their houses again. As everyone stepped outside, it was just a sea of yellow tape, flashing lights, and uniformed officers. It was absolutely unbelievable, like a storyline in a dark TV show. Once Richard had been treated in hospital, the nurses said detectives could come and interview him. He was shaken and in shock, but told them everything that had happened that morning. He said he had left the house at 8 a.m. to drop the kids at school, and then returned at around 8:30 a.m. to put his work shirt on. He saw Connie getting changed into her gym clothes and backing her car out of the driveway. She was heading to a spin class at the local YMCA, but the class was canceled, so she had to come straight back. Richard had a 40-minute commute to work, but about 10 minutes into his drive, he realized he had forgotten his laptop, so he turned back too. He then got his phone. His alarm system had been triggered by something or someone inside the house. He emailed his boss from his phone to say he was going to be late as he wanted to make sure everything was okay. He was back home between 8:45 a.m. and 9 a.m., and when he walked in, he heard a noise upstairs. He crept up and found a tall man wearing camouflage clothing and a mask rummaging through Connie's jewelry. The intruder saw him and held up a knife demanding money, credit cards, and PIN numbers. Richard said he handed over his wallet. His face was totally covered, but he was tall, about 6'2" if Richard were to guess, with a stocky build and a deep voice. He compared him to Vin Diesel. After this, he said things got hazy, and everything happened too quickly. He heard Connie coming back and yelled for her to run away. So I yelled to her to get out of the house. My wife didn't run. She must have ran into the basement, because we have 2 guns in the house. One was in the basement in a locked box, and one's in our closet. She ran downstairs, but rather than escaping, she ran to the basement. He thought it was to grab a gun to protect them. The man ran into the basement after Connie and Richard heard 2 shots ring out at 9:05 a.m. Richard ran down, saw his wife dead on the ground, and the man holding one of his guns. The killer then stabbed him in the legs with a box cutter, zip-tied him to a chair, and burned him with a blowtorch. I'm sitting in the chair half. I was kind of half-tied up, and in shock, I guess. What do you mean half-tied up? I had one leg free, and an arm free. He tied one leg, tied one arm. And he tied my neck fairly tight with tie wrap. I got a torch to kind of just blow on his mask a little bit, and it caught on fire. He dropped a blowtorch. I was starting to scream for help. I screamed for help. I couldn't hear a soul. I got really dizzy. Richard said he had managed to grab the blowtorch and burn the man's face, and the attacker quickly fled the scene. Still tied to the chair, Richard managed to drag himself up the stairs to the kitchen to hit the panic button linked to their home alarm system. He then made a brief 911 call. It was such a wild and scary story that detectives didn't even know where to start. They spoke to neighbors and Connie and Richard's friends. Friends told detectives that in the months before the couple had been having issues with a contractor, they weren't satisfied with the work done on their home and actually ended up suing him for a few $1,000s. One of their cars then had the windscreen smashed in, and Connie was convinced it was him. She said she was so worried that despite being scared of guns, they wanted to buy one for their own safety. Richard did, and kept it in the basement. Testing confirmed that this was the gun that had killed Connie. They tracked this contractor down. His name was Ken, and he did admit that their working relationship had ended on bad terms. He was angry that he had lost money in the civil suit, but said he had already moved on. It was definitely interesting timing, but did this make him a killer? Police instincts said no. Ken was happy to be photographed, and let the police look around and look at his devices. He had no criminal record, and his height, build, and voice did not match the description that Richard gave. And for someone that had been around their house as much as he had, Richard probably should have recognized him despite the mask. His alibi was concrete, and Ken the contractor was ruled out. During the week after Christmas, as many were getting ready to ring in the new year, Connie's family and friends, as well as the community of Ellington, were getting ready for her wake. No one was surprised at the big turnout. Even with the freezing temperature, hundreds had lined up to pay their respects. After waiting in a 3-hour line to talk to Richard at the funeral, Connie's 2 best friends of 20 years, 2 people that had been around the couple's home for over a decade and been out with Richard and Connie more times than they could remember, were shocked when they finally reached him. And how to know my wife? He asked, looking at them blankly. They stood there completely confused. They put it down to stress and moved along the line. But they did turn to each other later and say, weird, there wasn't a single mark on him. No bruises, no scratches, nothing. At Connie's funeral, to her friend's surprise, Richard left unusually early. Earlier than anyone else, in fact. You would think that they would have any sort of lead by this point, right? 2 weeks, and still no arrest in the murder of a young Ellington mother. 39-year-old Connie DeBate was found dead just before Christmas. Police responded to her Birchview Drive home. After the house alarm was activated, they found her husband, Richard DeBate, injured inside the smoky home. Police later found Connie with gunshot wounds to the head and stomach. Her death ruled a homicide, but police have yet to make an arrest, and they've said there is no threat to the public. Still, the entire situation putting residents around town on edge. Understandably, Fox 61's Katie Carano went to Ellington today to get some answers. She joins us now with the very latest. Katie, Audrey and Brent. This murder happened on December 23rd, and people in town tell me the more time passes without answers, the more the rumor mill seems to churn. These guys are like family. You know, these ladies have been coming in forever. Luann Lanzieri hears a lot of the Ellington town chatter inside her nail salon on West Road. And there's a lot of rumors going around. Rumors about the murder of Ellington mom, Connie Debate. And 2 weeks since the crime, there's still been no arrest. It seems like every day someone's coming in and asking, have you heard anything else? You know, this is what we heard. Luann says most people are confident the police will find whoever killed her childhood friend. I grew up with her in Vernon as well when she was little, and she was always a wonderful person. So I hope they find the correct person that did this to her. The other neighbors we talked to did not want to go on camera, but say it is scary and nerve-wracking to know there has not been an arrest. They say this is what everyone around town is talking about, and they just want an answer. But answers so far are scarce. The detectives are working very hard. They're waiting for a lot of evidence to come back from the labs. They want all their ducks in a row before they can make a decision of what's going on. Ellington First Selectman Lori Spielman says she's in touch with police nearly every day and has been told this was an isolated incident. Any idea when something might be coming? I don't know, maybe next week. But they are still waiting for some of the evidence to come back from the labs. We reached out to state police tonight for an update on the investigation, but have not heard back. We also tried contacting Connie's husband, Rick Debate, but he has not responded. Over the following days, Richard seemed by all accounts fairly chipper, going out for dinner and drinks, throwing parties at his house, and joking around as if nothing had happened. People said if you didn't know who he was, you would have no clue his wife had been murdered and he had been brutally attacked. Richard posted to Facebook saying he was staying strong for his boys and thanked everyone for their support. Grief can be a strange thing to navigate, and there is no textbook to follow. But the town was soon talking about Richard and how strange he had been. Something was definitely not sitting well, and everyone, friends, family, and detectives, were starting to get an unsettling feeling about his story. Back at Birchview Drive, the investigation was pretty slow. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors saw or heard anything. But with the houses being so far apart, officers accepted that was probably going to be the case. There was no forced entry, but the basement window was open slightly, so perhaps this was the killer's way in. There was nothing missing, nothing even remotely disturbed, and canine units could not detect any sense in the home. In fact, the first doggone scene was intent on going back to Richard in the ambulance, and the second two failed to pick up any scent of an intruder leaving the property. The wallet Richard said was taken from him was found just outside, seemingly with everything still in it. The gun was found to have no fingerprints on it, not from the intruder, Connie or Richard. Richard had some knife wounds, but nurses determined them to be superficial. The more he spoke to detectives, the more he was going from absolute certainties about what had happened to vague I don't knows. He had gone from saying he had heard Connie get shot, to seeing her get shot, to not seeing or hearing anything. He told the first responders that the killer was still in the house roaming around, but told the other detectives he had watched him leave. He also said everything started just before 9 a.m., and Connie was shot 4 times. However, the 911 call was not made until almost 10:30 a.m. A day after Connie was killed, on Christmas Eve no less, Richard retained a defense attorney, and a week later, he put in a claim for Connie's $475,000 life insurance policy, and withdrew $93,000 from an investment account in Connie's name. It seemed that as perfect as everyone thought Connie and Richard's relationship was, there was definitely a lot going on behind closed doors. In December 2014, Connie had started a note on her iPhone called "Why I Want a Divorce." She wrote about the irresponsible way Richard handled money, and said he was an unfit parent and didn't show her any attention or affection. Connie wrote, "He takes money from a lot of accounts that don't belong to him. Says he's sorry, but takes no responsibility for it. I don't know anything about his day, who he speaks to, or what goes on in his life other than work. I'm tired of covering for him. I'm tired of lying and acting like things are great when they aren't." In the reasons to stay in her marriage part she wrote, "People like him. When he is in a great mood, he is fun to be around. I still find him attractive. I'm myself around him. But what could Richard's motive possibly be?" Authorities had been keeping it very quiet, but they already had a motive, and had had since their first interview with Richard in the hospital. Richard had been having an affair with a woman called Sarah he had known since high school. Connie knew her too. Sarah had even given a reading at Richard and Connie's wedding. Richard and Sarah had been on and off for years, but started seeing each other more in May 2015. Just a month later, Sarah found out she was pregnant and allegedly asked him to leave Connie. During the first 7-hour interview they had with him in hospital, Richard had actually voluntarily brought Sarah up. He admitted to having a sexual relationship with her, but only because Sarah wanted kids of her own. Sarah asked the couple for help, saying she wanted to have a child by herself, but was struggling to pay for everything, and asked if Richard could be the sperm donor. We were going to donate sperm to her, to have a kid. Richard said that because of the cost of doing this through the doctors, they decided to do it, in his words, the conventional way. Untraditional, but traditional in the way that the baby was conceived? Yeah, detectives asked. So Connie knew you were trying to get Sarah pregnant? Yes, he replied. Connie not only co-signed everything, it was her idea. Do you think your wife had any issues with that? It was her idea, in a way. This was very difficult for detectives to believe. Even more so when they found out Richard admitted to his friends that he had got Sarah pregnant accidentally. Richard's second story was that Connie was unable to have another child but wanted one. So Sarah offered to carry the baby for them, and all three of them could co-parent. After raised eyebrows from the investigators, Richard was forced to change his story again and admit that the pregnancy was an accident and it was a months-long affair. Was her getting pregnant unexpected? It was unexpected. Richard started lying to Connie about where he was, saying he was working late or with friends. But to Sarah he was professing his love and telling her he was about to file for divorce. By the time Connie was killed, Sarah was just 8 weeks away from having their daughter. Richard took Connie to Vermont on a romantic trip, and when Connie posted photos of the trip on Facebook, Sarah saw them and realized he was lying about leaving her. Whether Connie at any point actually found out about the affair or the baby is still unknown, but friends do not believe that Connie knew about anything. They say she would have confided in someone. Whatever the truth was, it seemed Richard had decided to remove her from the picture and start this new life and, in his eyes, solve all these problems that he had created. In June 2015, Richard did in fact meet with a divorce attorney, but did not file any paperwork. Richard's phone showed a text to Sarah 2 days before the murder promising to leave Connie, and a day later he sent her a text message saying that he loved her and would see her tomorrow. Connie's phone also revealed an argument between her and Richard that same day, where she accused him of lying about a bill. "You lied to me, and I am again cleaning up your F*** asterisk 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 GA asterisk 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 GA asterisk 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 GING mess. Great day off and merry F asterisk 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 G Christmas. It will be a very Merry Christmas," Richard replied. Little did Connie know Richard had used a secret credit card to pay for flowers for Sarah, stay at hotels, and spent more than $1,000 at a strip club. Richard had also made internet searches for deadly over-the-counter combinations, fast, untraceable homemade poison, and tasteless poison easily available. If all this wasn't enough, a big piece of evidence was yet to come. But this would take a while to fully get together. It was soon Christmas 2016, and then the new year, and into the spring of 2017. Connie, always an active person, was an avid user of her Fitbit. She wore it every day. The day she died was no different. The data on her Fitbit presented a very different timeline and story to the one Richard had given. Police already knew that Richard had waited over an hour before he made the call to 911. But perhaps this could be put down to trauma and stress, and just getting his times muddled up. But using Connie's Fitbit, CCTV footage, computer and house alarm data, the timeline of the whole morning was actually this. At 8:26 and 8:27 a.m., Richard was actually on Facebook on his computer at home. This was exactly the same time he claimed he was driving to work. At 8:41 a.m., a logon to Outlook.com from Richard's computer was also made. Between 8:45 and 9 a.m., Richard had claimed he returned home to encounter the intruder, shortly followed by Connie coming home and being shot. But at 8:46 a.m., Connie actually left for her spin class according to her Fitbit. 1 minute later, Richard logged into the home alarm system, attempting to disarm it. At 8:50, he successfully did, and then rearmed it again. 9 minutes later, he disarmed it for a second time using his keychain fob. At 8:53 a.m., Connie arrived to work out. A few minutes later, she sent a Facebook message to her therapist. At 9:04 a.m., Richard sent an email to his supervisor at work. He claimed he sent it when he was pulled over in his car, but the email was clearly sent from his home IP address. At 9:08 a.m., Connie left the building and got back into her car. 10 minutes later, Richard was looking at the Indian Valley YMCA website, where Connie had gone for her class. At 9:23 a.m., Connie's Fitbit registered activity when the home's garage door was opened, and at 9:40 to 9:46 a.m., she was on Facebook. It seemed Richard was trying to work out how to get her into the basement during this time. At 10:05, Connie's last movements were registered on her Fitbit, and at 10:12, the panic alarm for the home security system was activated from Richard's keychain fob. The data showed Connie was alive and well for roughly an hour after Richard said she had died, and nothing matched any part of his story. Richard hadn't left the house, none of the timings matched up, and her movement and heart rate never indicated running from an intruder in the home. Finally, in April 2017, husband arrested, charged with murdering his wife more than a year ago. Connie DeBate, an Ellington mother of two, brutally murdered in her home 2 days before Christmas. Well, tonight, finally a break in that case. A newly released 50-page arrest warrant revealing what was happening inside that home, inside that marriage. Yeah, we also have this exclusive video showing Mr. DeBate being transported by state police tonight. Richard was arrested and charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and giving false statements to the police. Grant says DeBate is being held under a $1 million bond and is scheduled to appear in court on Monday. State police say the investigation turned over every stone. It's very important to follow all leads, follow all evidence, speak to all witnesses, any potential suspects. This is about the victim. Grant says the lengthy investigation was a collaborative effort from several factions of law enforcement. She claims it was necessary to be extremely thorough during the process in order to prevent possible mistrials in the future. Community members reacting to the arrest of Rick DeBate right in their own backyard. Anytime somebody loses their life, it's unfortunate, especially when it's the best. Friday afternoon, neighbors say 40-year-old DeBate was pulling onto the family street when he was served an arrest warrant for the murder of his wife, Connie. And now community members feel justice is on the horizon. They wouldn't bring the case up if they didn't really have a lot of evidence that it was the husband. Evidence that took nearly a year and a half to gather. Community members say the lengthy investigation is a positive. Nowadays, the police, they gotta cross every T and dot every I before they can come after you really. Or they could blow the whole case. A good lawyer will get them off. Fortunately, you have a murderer running around the streets if it's supposed to be him. But you know the good side about that. That means they did a thorough investigation. So hopefully, like I said, justice be served. Still, people in town are still shaken by the crime. It's kind of a dangerous world, rough world, dangerous country. You gotta watch your back. Now we reached out to DeBate's attorney tonight, and he just sent us this statement, which reads, "My client is innocent of these charges, and he looks forward to be vindicated after trial." He posted his $1 million bail and was allowed out awaiting trial. He was co-parenting the child he had with Sarah during this time too. More tragedy struck in 2019 when Connie's father passed away. He had been very ill for a long time, but had been determined to hold on to see justice for his daughter. Connie's brother said his body just gave out, and he passed away never seeing her killer behind bars. Richard's trial was originally set to take place in April 2020, but just as the jury was selected, the pandemic, as well as Richard's lawyer passing away, postponed everything. Finally, in April 2022, his trial began. It had now been just over 6 years since Connie was killed. We have a murder trial that has gained worldwide attention. Now, cameras are not allowed in the courtroom for this trial, but we are allowed to sit in and listen. The now former detective told jurors that Richard DeBate gave law enforcement consent to search his Ellington home, his iPhone, and also allow them to swab him for DNA and gunshot residue. The state presented other evidence, including photographs of Richard DeBate's injuries while he was in his hospital bed, along with clothing, his hospital socks, and a shoe that had blood on it. DeBate's attorney had this to say outside the courtroom today. As the trial is ongoing, we would love to make comments day to day as each piece of evidence comes in, explain our defense, and explain our side. But what we need to do is respect the process here. Now, that Fitbit that we've been talking about, that hasn't been mentioned in court just yet, but I'm sure it will be brought up tomorrow, though the jury is expected to listen to the rest of that 4-hour recording. We are live from Rockville, Courtney Zeller, Channel 3 Eyewitness News. There were 600 pieces of evidence submitted and testimony from more than 130 witnesses, including Richard himself. Richard's lawyers said that it was clear that the police had tunnel vision from the start. They always believed it was Richard and worked backwards from there to make their timeline fit. But as everyone knew, this was simply not true. The police had followed up on every lead Richard gave them, including the contractor, and had ruled everyone out. This added to the technological evidence, the crime scene, or lack thereof, the canine units, the holes in his many versions of events, and the affair pointed to just one person, him. Richard's lawyers also focused on some unknown DNA found in the home, including, they said, on the gun that killed Connie. They also claimed that a house cleaner had seen a dark shape moving near the window of the debate's house. But prosecutors described Richard as a ticking time bomb who had forced himself into a corner. They said that Richard killed Connie because he felt a divorce would ruin his reputation, and he didn't want to lose their friends. He was also stressing about the financial implications of a divorce, as well as having to work out custody arrangements for RJ and Connor. Now, for weeks into the trial, one of Connie's sisters took the stand today, saying the family learned she was shot only after a family meeting was held at their parents' home, a day after she was killed. And Richard DeBate was there. She says when he arrived at the home, she heard him say, "I didn't do it. There was someone in the house. They said, I need a lawyer." She also says Richard DeBate needed help getting into the house. He looked distraught, physically ill, and it appeared he had been crying. The family gathered around the kitchen table, and she told jurors Richard DeBate told them the story about what happened. He told the family he retained a lawyer, and the lawyer told him not to talk about anything, but believed he owed them an explanation. Connie's sister and her brother-in-law, who also testified today, says Richard DeBate showed no emotion when he told the story. Connie's sister says Richard DeBate mentioned a trip the family was supposed to take after the holidays, going to Great Wolf Lodge, and that he will have to find someone to go with. 7 people who lived or lived in an Ellington neighborhood at the time of the crime also testified, saying they didn't see anything out of the ordinary that day. And the judge mentioned in court today that they are hoping to conclude the state's case by the end, or by the middle, rather, of next week. There is no court tomorrow. It will pick back up on Friday. Richard testified that yes, he was in love with both women and felt trapped. He admitted to the affair, but said that this still didn't make him a killer. He said he missed Connie every day and wouldn't do that to his boys. Sarah testified and said she did not at all want to cause the breakup of the DeBate family. In fact, she was happy to raise her daughter herself and not even put his name on the birth certificate if he chose to stay with Connie. She tearfully explained that she was ashamed and embarrassed by what had unfolded, had never put pressure on Richard to leave his wife. Sarah never discussed a plan to hurt or kill Connie, and said that Richard had never admitted to killing Connie either. After 5 weeks, both teams rested their cases, and in May 2022, guilty on all counts, a jury has reached a verdict in the Richard DeBate murder trial. Mark and Aaron, a lot of surprise here at the courthouse. The jury probably deliberated for at the most 3 hours. Richard and Connie's families had emotional reactions as the verdict was read. Connie was essentially sentenced to death, while this convicted murderer has been living his life while out on parole for 6.5 years. There will be no closure for the Margata family, but there is finally justice for Connie. She was a terrific sister, mother, daughter. I loved her. I remember when she was born. I'm 10 years older. My father brought me to the hospital to see her for the first time, and the nurse held her up to the window. And that was very memorable, seeing the new baby for the first time. Richard's defense team said they're prepared to keep fighting for their client. They only started about 24 hours ago. And it was a 5-week trial. So I'd say we were a bit surprised. I think all 3 of us very disappointed with the outcome. It's been a lot of effort and exhaustive case. But again, we're going to have more filings. We'll say more on those. Thank you. First up right now at 4, we start with some breaking news this afternoon. The man convicted in the Fitbit murder trial will spend 65 years in prison. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark. Richard DeBate was sentenced to 65 years in prison, with the judge calling his crime brutal, calculated, incomprehensible. His maximum release date is May 2087. Before he was let away, he said, "I'm here before you as an innocent man. I will never stop fighting for justice for my wife, Connie, who I think about every single day." To this day, his parents still believe him, and find it unfathomable to think that 2 days before Christmas, he would just lure his wife downstairs and kill her, stage everything and carry on without her like nothing had happened. In October 2024, appealed against his conviction. Defense attorney for Richard Debate, Trent Lalama, addressing 6 justices in a room full of Yukon law students, claiming the state prosecutor, Matthew Jadansky, engaged in a pattern of impropriety that denied Debate a fair trial. Perhaps some of the most damaging would be the ticking time bomb question, which was 24 hours, almost exactly 24 hours. After that, those notes had been excluded by the trial court. The state asked, "Did you feel like a ticking time?" I mean, ticking time bomb makes my client out to be a dangerous person. I don't think that there is anything improper at all about using the defendant's own words in a prior inconsistent statement to impeach his testimony once he testifies. Isn't this supposed to be a fair trial? Not a gamesmanship episode, but at the recording of this episode, this is still in the hands of the Connecticut Supreme Court. In many cases we cover, people seem to get this idea that murder is the only option, the only possible way out of a situation. It is something that truly makes sense to them. And the amount of pain caused by someone being taken away from everyone, the aftermath and the severity of this, just doesn't seem to compute. Connie's sister Leslie is now raising Connie's sons, who as a result of Richard's lies live in fear that a stranger could break into their home. They're only just coming to terms with what their father did to their mother. Connie's mother always thinks of the last phone call she had with Connie. She remembers the first words when she answered, "Mom, I love you. You're my best friend." And that really summed Connie up. She was just a kind, caring person. She wanted everyone to know that they were special and important all the time. Her best friend Kim said, "I miss her laughter. I miss the way she would make me feel. I miss how much fun she was, and how much life she brought into me and others that she was around. Everything. I miss every single thing about her." For those of you that like to listen on the go, we now have our episodes in podcast form, and you can now find this via the link in our description box, or by searching Truly Criminal Podcast on your podcasting platform. Story 5. 27-year-old Jessica Kaler lived in Austin, Texas, and after graduating from Texas State University, her life was full on with 2 jobs working towards her master's degree and always busy socially. She worked at the local grocery store and also as a substitute teacher, but soon hoping to get a permanent position in an elementary school. She was also saving money for her master's to get her student loan debts cleared too. Jessica had definitely had a lot on her plate and a fair few stressors, but always a glass half full kind of person. She was confident it wouldn't be this way for long. Her family said Jessica once wrote, "Someday, everything will make perfect sense. Laugh at the confusion, smile through the tears, and keep reminding yourself that everything happens for a reason." Conscientious, focused, and fun to be around. Jessica was in a really good place and had a lot of things to look forward to. Labor Day, September 7th, 2009. Jessica was spending the day with her cousin and best friend, Melanie, along with a few others. It was a really hot day, so the group were swimming in the pool and using the weather for a nice barbecue. Everyone stayed by the pool for a few hours and then went out to a restaurant. Jessica had worked the next day, was trying to save money, and was driving everyone home, so she didn't want to drink more than a couple. After the restaurant closed, the group went to a bar to play some pool. Just after midnight, the group left the bar and Jessica started dropping everyone back home. At 1:30 a.m., Melanie, who was the last person in the car, asked Jessica if she just wanted to stay at hers for the night, but Jessica declined, wanting to make sure she woke up fresh and ready for her shift. She also needed to get some dog food on the way home anyway, and check on her pets. She hugged Melanie goodbye and set off for a local Walmart. A few hours later, as people were up and getting ready for work themselves, Melanie's phone rang. It was one of Jessica's colleagues. Jessica was a no-show. Instantly, Melanie was bothered by this. She was never one to even phone in sick, let alone just not turn up. Melanie made a few more calls, but with every person that said they hadn't heard from her, she knew deep down that something had to be wrong. Jessica shared an apartment with Melanie's brother John, but he too was surprised to hear this. John was a police officer and had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. He hadn't seen or heard her in the apartment, but assumed she was sleeping and they just hadn't crossed paths. He drove home and was immediately met with one of her dogs who was a little distressed. She wasn't home, and it looked as if she hadn't even been home since the previous day. John called his colleagues and reported her missing. He got them to track her phone right away, and it pinged near the intersection of U.S. Highway 183 and Walton Way in Cedar Park. It wasn't a secluded area at all, far from it. There were a lot of businesses there, and at this time of day, a lot of cars and people. Perhaps she had broken down. and her phone had simply died. Melanie and her boyfriend Sergey sped over and spotted her white Kia straight away. It was parked neatly just outside of Little Caesars. They got out and were immediately hit by a horrendous smell coming from her car. Although the windows were rolled up, it was now 90 degrees outside, so it was still very intense. Jessica was inside, slumped the driver's seat, which was set way further back than it should have been. She wasn't moving. They could see what looked like feces across the inside of the car too. Her car was unlocked, and as soon as they opened it, the smell hit them even more. Melanie touched Jessica's head to try and wake her up, but she still didn't move. Her body was red from sunburn. She had marks all over her, and her hair was wet with sweat. Sergey called 911. Jessica Kaler had been murdered. There was a ligature mark across her neck and small hemorrhages on and around her eyes, face, and neck. She was covered in bruises and scratches too. She had been raped and strangled twice. Once with some sort of cloth, potentially the tie on her dress, which she had been wearing over her bathing suit, and strangled another time by someone's hand. The marks on her neck showed that she had clawed back trying to fight her killer off. There were a lot of scratches on her neck, which had been caused by her own nails. Her wallet, cards, and car keys were missing, but her phone was taken in to be looked at. This was a pretty busy and public place, so police started with the restaurants and shops nearby. A restaurant worker said she had arrived early that morning and had seen Jessica alive. She was crawling around naked inside her car, and it seemed like she was trying to put her bathing suit on. She saw her again later, this time wearing her white dress. She was sitting outside her car playing with her hair. The third and final time she saw her, she was in the car again, talking to herself and doing some odd hand gestures. A couple of other people also saw Jessica, and described her as confused and lethargic. No one had spoken to her, but her behavior had definitely looked erratic and strange. The next time anyone saw her, she was dead. Melanie said she was totally sober when she left her, and she didn't take drugs either. This was confirmed when the toxicology test came back, showing there were no signs of drugs, alcohol, or medication in her system whatsoever. Things were starting to get even stranger and more complicated, and they needed to look deeper for any reason, as to why she may have been acting so oddly. In the back of her car was a huge bag of dog food. Melanie told police that she was going to pick some up, so they knew it was purchased that morning. There was a 24-hour Walmart across the road from her car as well. Sure enough, they saw Jessica on the cameras, pulling into the Walmart at 1:45. She entered the store alone wearing her white dress, a red baseball cap, and carrying her bag over her shoulder. Jessica was walking around inside perfectly fine, definitely not acting erratically, and she wasn't stumbling or struggling either. She didn't stop to talk to anyone, and no one seemed to be watching her. She went straight to the dog food, and then to the checkout before leaving the store. One of the employees stood by the doors and watched her as she left, but this was where everything changed. Up until this point, no one inside had been following her, but suddenly a tall man in a brown shirt and baseball cap seemed to be hot on her tail. He had been in the Walmart only a few minutes before Jessica, parking up his small truck a good walk away from her car. He used the bathroom inside, and when he left, Jessica had been just in front of him carrying the big bag of dog food over her shoulder. As Jessica went back outside to her Kia, the man still following her was about 20 seconds behind, and his pace was quickening. Frustratingly, her car was parked right behind a large tree, which completely blocked the view of the cameras, and the only other camera that looked at her car was terrible quality. But it was still enough to show the man had walked right up to her car, because he didn't emerge again or come back into view, and his truck remained in its parking spot. About 2 minutes after Jessica and the man reached her car pulled out and drove towards the exits. It was very troubling footage. The cameras inside the Walmart also had a view of Jessica's car from when it was parked outside the Little Caesars. They followed the person that got out, watching as they crossed the road into the Walmart parking lot. They could now tell it was the same man from earlier, as he got right back into his truck and sped off. At 3:05, 20 minutes after her car parked outside the Little Caesars, her bank card was used at an Exxon gas station, and it was the same man from Walmart. Jessica did not leave her car, and it stayed stationary from 2:50 a.m. until she was found. But because a couple of employees saw her, she had to have been alive up until that point, which was a good few hours. Things were just not making sense. Investigators released part of the tapes and put out a be on the lookout for the red pickup truck. Now all they could do was wait for someone to hopefully call in. While the police carried on with their searches, Jessica's funeral was held. Her family said this was the first time they actually learned that she had been strangled, as they could see the marks around her neck. This made an already painful day so much more devastating. Who could have done this to her and why? To the detective's surprise, they got a call about the truck from a woman called Leslie. Her fiancé was best friends with the man she believed owned the vehicle, 37-year-old Crispin Harmel. A few hours before Jessica was found, Leslie said Crispin was supposed to come to their apartment to drop off some money that he owed. But he never showed up, and this struck her as odd. She couldn't shake this bad feeling that she had, and needed to get it off her chest. Crispin was like family, and it was hard to make a phone call like that. But at the same time a young girl lost her life, Leslie said. They ran his name through their system, and found that he had been pulled over for having an expired registration just 3 weeks earlier. The police had their body cams on at the time, and they could see he was driving the same truck and even wearing the same baseball cap. This was definitely the person they were looking for. 5 days after Jessica was found dead, police knocked on Crispin's door for an interview. It was clear that he had changed the appearance of the truck. Certain parts that were once silver were now painted black. Crispin did not seem to be surprised that they were there, and admitted to knowing Jessica. He claimed he had arranged to meet Jessica through a website called lonelyhousewifehookups.com. They spoke over Messenger and agreed to meet at the Walmart between 12:30 a.m. and 1 a.m. on the morning she was killed. Crispin said he and Jessica drove away in her car, and the pair had sex near a park. He had been in her car, and he could have been one of the last people to see her alive, but this didn't mean he was a killer, he said. Police didn't say this, but they already knew the tapes told a very different story. Crispin and Jessica pulled into Walmart long after 1 a.m. They did not interact or even acknowledge each other before he got into her car, and her behavior when she arrived at the Walmart suggested she was not there to meet anyone either. She was there for dog food, and that was it. It was clear that there was absolutely no kind of relationship between the two of them, and his story had instantly fallen flat. He then said she drove him back to Walmart, and they chatted for a minute in her car. He told her about his money troubles, saying he was struggling to pay his gas, so she offered him her debit card and wrote the PIN number on his hand. The next day, when he learned that Jessica was dead, he said to himself, "I was just with this girl and she's dead. It's strange for it to happen." In a panic, he threw away her debit card and changed his truck's appearance because he didn't want anyone to think he was involved. He said everything with such confidence, but the police knew it was the most convoluted story. Melanie and her friends said she made no mention of going to meet anyone that night either. She was not only a very open book, but she was the type of person that if she was meeting someone she didn't know, and that late at night, she would have made sure everyone knew where she was going and who the person was. A detailed examination of both of their computers and phones showed that there was never a single conversation between the pair, nor had Jessica visited the website he said she had. What was clear, though, is that just a few hours after she was found dead, he was searching her name and looking up images and articles of her. Police believed that Crispin had followed her outside, forced himself into her car where he made her drive to a park, sexually assaulted and strangled her twice before driving her car back to the parking lot, leaving her for dead and stealing her card. The second the detectives mentioned what they had seen on the cameras, Crispin asked for a lawyer and went silent. Police knew this had to be Jessica's killer, but they still just couldn't work out what had happened in between him parking her car and her being found dead. He hadn't returned to her, and no one else had been near her car either. Nothing was self-inflicted, but she was still alive long after Crispin had left the scene. It was a scene of total confusion. They did not have enough evidence to charge him with murder at this point, but they did have enough to charge him with tampering with evidence. In May 2010, after pleading guilty, he was sentenced to 10 years. Authorities had kept her murder case open, and were going back through everything again and again. Finally, they found something that would start to give them some answers. Detectives had read an interesting article written by an Indiana University School of Medicine professor about people who were strangled, but then would suffocate hours later from the effects of the strangulation. It was not an instant or quick death. It could actually be drawn out over many hours. This is known as delayed death due to strangulation. Experts said this could easily explain why she was acting so strangely outside of her car, and the feces inside the car too. She had been so brain damaged by being strangled twice, she had no idea what was going on or where she was. She was unable to ask for help or use her phone, and this, coupled with her having heat stroke as she lay in the hot sun for so long, meant she was in a totally fatal situation. Dr. Bill Smock, a doctor of forensic medicine, said you go unconscious first. And that's because your brain isn't getting enough oxygenated blood. Then you may have a seizure. Then, at a minimum of 15 seconds, your brain cells are dying. The first thing you lose is control of your bladder. Then you lose control of your rectal sphincter. The last part of our brain to die is our brain stem, the part that controls our breathing and our heartbeat. But above that, in the brain are things like personality and memory. It was clear that Crispin had strangled her twice to the point he thought she was dead, but she was actually unconscious. Knowing his intention was definitely to kill her, and having so much science behind them finally, in May 2013. He was indicted for capital murder. He pleaded not guilty. An expert on strangulation testified in a Williamson County murder trial today. The doctor testified that he agrees with the medical examiner's findings that Jessica Kaler died as a result of strangulation. Crispin Harmel is accused of killing the 27-year-old. Witnesses saw Kaler alive hours after she was strangled in her hot car, acting strangely. Dr. Bill Smock says it's because she was attacked. So in this case, I think we have two explanations as to why Jessica's behavior was abnormal. One, brain damage from strangulation. And number two, heat. The defense cross-examined Dr. Smock using his own testimony, saying if someone was strangled, their reaction would be to dig their nails into the attacker, which would likely collect the attacker's DNA under their fingernails. There's no DNA linking Kaler and Harmel. The defense felt good about their case. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to Jessica. But given how hot it was that day, this wasn't entirely surprising. Experts said extreme heat and humidity can degrade DNA much quicker, and it was unlikely that anything would have been found on her body. The prosecution weren't worried. The amount of evidence literally caught on tape was damning enough. There was no other person that could have done this to her. The state called Elizabeth Crispin's former girlfriend. She testified that he had told her his apartment had burned down, and he had lost his phone in the fire. The truth was he had had his phone taken. As part of the investigation, he also told her his truck had broken down, but again this had been seized. To everyone's frustration, it ended in a mistrial after the prosecutors were accused of withholding evidence. So it was back to square one for everybody. The DA, Jana Duty, was even later sent to jail for violating a gag order and was sanctioned by the State Bar of Texas for professional misconduct. A few years later, she would be found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Details of a 2009 Cedar Park murder case will be heard again this week in a Williamson County courtroom. Crispin Harmel is being retried. In the spring of 2018, Crispin's second trial started. It had now been almost 10 years since Jessica was killed. The Williamson County jury watched a 2009 suspect interrogation in a murder trial out of Cedar Park today. The jury watched the second interview Cedar Park police had with Harmel after they say they found holes in his story. Zan's Lauren Kravitz has more. The primary concern after our investigation was moving forward was that many things were just not adding up. For a third day, Sergeant Bond, who investigated Jessica Kaler's murder, testified he had a list of concerns after his first interview with Crispin Harmel. In a follow-up video interview, Harmel said Kaler drove them back to the shopping center near Walmart after they had consensual sex. But Bond said that didn't make sense. The seat itself was pushed all the way back on the rails and her feet could not touch the gas and brakes. Harmel also said Kaler started up her car as he was walking back to his truck. I remember seeing like a light splash or whatever, headlights or whatever. But surveillance video never shows the lights turn on or Kaler's car leave. In fact, Kaler's car keys were not in the car and never found. Harmel also said Kaler lent him her debit card to get gas, but he threw it away once he saw police were looking for him. Generally speaking, when people either change something or get rid of something, it's because they don't want it to be located in or on their person, which means they want to disassociate with that particular item. And that was Lauren Kravitz reporting. The defense started to cross-examine Sergeant Bond late this afternoon. One of the things that they argued was that neither Harmel nor Kaler would have looked for each other inside Walmart because the plan was to meet at her car. Prosecutors argued that neither of them were looking for each other at the time that Harmel said they were supposed to meet. In other news tonight, a jury found a man guilty of killing a woman in Cedar Park in 2009. Crispin Harmel is convicted of kidnapping, raping, and strangling her. The judge sentenced Harmel to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Fortunately this time, the jury found Crispin Harmel guilty of capital murder. As prosecutors did not seek the death penalty, He was automatically sentenced to life in prison without parole. In 2020, he appealed against his conviction, but it was upheld, and he remains locked up with the same sentence to serve. Jessica had had a wonderful evening with her friends, and as she walked back to her car that morning, she was ready to go home, feed her dogs, get up, and just go to work. Her master's degree was in reaching distance, and she had so much ready and waiting for her. Jessica's cousin John said he really hoped there would be some sense of relief knowing he was caught and locked up, but it didn't happen because it didn't change anything. He still gets to live and Jessica doesn't, he said. Her dad said so much was snatched away that day. He took away my opportunity to walk her down the aisle. She would have been a great mother. I know it. I miss her a lot. Melanie says, as with all loss, some days are easier than others, but good memories will often be ripped away because of what she saw in the parking lot. No day will ever feel completely whole again. Something will always be missing.